Hello there, everybody. This is episode 127 of the Warhammer 40,000 podcast that goes by the identity of Look Out, Sir. My name's Dan, and I do that bit at the beginning of the show where I introduce my good fella, Phil. How's it going, Philip? I saw you wince there, Phil. You didn't like me calling you my good fella. It kind of implied an undue nature of familiarity, I suppose.
It wasn't a wince. It was more of a smirk, like it's different. It's
different.
Not buddy.
Yeah, changing it up. I like to mix it up a bit, though, mate. You know, I don't like to just kind of conform to the consistent kind of delivery every week. Although I noticed that it obviously follows the same kind of rhythmic cadence. There was a wonderful show that I used to watch as a younger man, and I found that what was really funny about how they developed the comedy as they went on with it is that they had obviously repetitively delivered certain jokes week on week, that over time they effectively boiled them down to just nonsensical noises but done with the same kind of rhythmics. And as the crowd, you started to understand what it meant when they were going like, and you'd be like, rhythmically, I know exactly what it is, but it's a load of old nonsense. But it was just that repetition that just sort of created it. So I suppose... Okay, Dan,
our bite, what show was it?
No one will know what it is. I can't be bothered to get into it.
Oh, okay. Well, fair enough.
No. Well,
it was... I don't want to know now.
That's fine.
Too late. But
exactly.
Maybe the listeners at home will want to know.
Exactly. Well, I'm just going to leave it out there. Let them kind of ponder it for themselves.
Maybe they can guess and leave it in the comments below.
It is a show I reference all too often, as it were. Not necessarily by name, but I consistently rip them off.
Oh, fair enough. Lovely.
I think in many respects that show is, and the series of shows that those particular creators created have informed so much of my approach to everything that I do in life. You can feel the tangible impact of it on everything. Like my brother Gabe, who does the Jeremy Beadle and other 5-star review segment introductions. He has been increasingly influenced in his life by the film Freddy Got Fingered. So much of his kind of like delivery of words is sort of influenced by Tom Green of that era. So he'll occasionally say something like, I'm a 28-year-old man. I can eat a chicken sandwich if I want, or something of that nature.
See, now I'm wincing. Now I'm definitely wincing.
It's a modern day masterpiece, mate. Don't go, poo-pooing Freddy Got Fingered.
One of the worst movies I've ever seen. But
mate, honestly, you need to go back and watch it with renewed enthusiasm. It's a modern day masterpiece. I'm telling you, it's an absolute masterclass in cinematic satire.
Fair enough. And on that note, shall we talk about some 40k?
Why not? What are we talking about this week, Phil?
We are getting on the hype train, the hype land train for squats, or as they're otherwise known, the Leagues of Votann.
I'm not overly keen on that name. I know I've had a little while to kind of get used to it, but, it hasn't quite sunk in yet.
It's a weird one. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess they don't want to embrace the term squats for various...
I guess no. It could be viewed quite derogatory, couldn't it?
Yeah, or legal IP reasons, or because of the term squatted. So, can you unsquat the squats?
I mean, they have done, clearly.
Well, the squats are
Unless
gone.
They're not really squats.
Well, they might not be. I think, I'm sure there'd be a form of squat at the very least.
Well, we do laboriously go over that topic throughout the podcast, so we probably don't need to
besmirch the topic at hand.
No, I shan't. It was a surprisingly entertaining chat, much like, but not really, our 5-star review. Or if I was following the example I was doing before in terms of breaking things down to that kind of rhythmic noise. See, sort of works.
Hang on a second, what is this? Some kind of review? A 5-star review? Well, let's get into the nitty-gritty of this Warhammer 5-star review.
That was this week's 5-star review. Comes from where, Phil?
Oh, okay.
That hasn't quite worked, this entire, example. Clearly, I haven't, repetitively stuck this stuff in your head too much just yet. Anyway, where's this 5-star review come from, Phil? Good God.
Let's just say Apple Podcasts of Great Britain.
No, you're quite wrong, Phil. It's come from Audible. Come on now. You know I was going to hit you with the Audible the next week. I wasn't going to do it the week, but now is the time.
Oh, well, this is exciting.
Audible.
Something brand new.
Exactly, because you can leave us 5-star reviews on Audible now. So, everyone out there who hasn't already done so, go ahead and do so. Because, again, I'll probably come back to Audible relatively frequently to continue to promote the fact that it's an option. So if you have been...
you can skip the queue.
Exactly, you can do a chat and cut.
Yeah.
Yes, that's it. We only have 2 reviews on Audible right now. So if you could be a saint and go and leave us a 5-star review on Audible, that would be amazing, because I imagine that wouldn't hurt our algorithm very much, would it? It would probably do us a favor. So even if you've given 5-star reviews before, why not leave us another one? Just on a different platform that will boost our performance, no doubt. I don't know if we get anything out of that. I suppose it's just a chance for more people to discover it, and then we can, kind of gingerly attempt to convert them onto Patreon. That's the whole business model, isn't it?
Well, I wouldn't say so, because, if that was honestly the case, we haven't been doing a very good job of it. We've been doing an awful job. We haven't had a new patron in some time. So if anyone listening does want to become the very next one, they can do.
Which is the answer to which is clearly no. But maybe one of the people who you could attract via your Audible review could be that next sucker.
Exactly. It's the pyramid scheme. It's like you can leave the Patreon scheme once you have done a 5-star review that has brought in a new Patreon supporter. That's the pyramid scheme, how it works.
Exactly. You got to have someone in your what's it called in the pyramid scheme? The next person down is it just your down line or something?
I don't know.
Poo shoot. There you go.
Well, it seems appropriate.
Yeah, almost certainly. I've never been involved in pyramid schemes except the ones that have been constructed to contain me in the more kind of, national economic sense. Anyway, this 5-star review, Phil, comes from Dave Mook13 from Audible. If you would like to be like Dave Mook13, why not go to Audible or iTunes or Facebook or anywhere else you can leave a 5-star review and do so. And then at some point we'll read you out. Although, as has already been stated, it's quite likely to happen all the sooner if you do it on Audible. Just saying. Number 1 40K podcast, 5 stars. Cool, blimey.
Strong.
Funny, entertaining, and damn right awesome podcast. With each new episode, I learn something new from Phil and Dan. A little bit offended by that, I've got to be honest with you.
Yes.
A bit offended by that.
I've ended up top billing. Never happened. Brilliant.
Exactly. I mean, alphabetically speaking, it's Dan and Phil. I'm just saying, it's nothing to do with my ego. That's just how it is alphabetically. Exactly. So the fact that you've elected to ignore the alphabetic billing suggests a greater level of appreciation for Phil. So I hope you know you've hurt me deeply, Dave McPherson. Anyway, we'll move past it. And having them being 4+ hours long helps me get through the boring drives I have to do for work. Keep on making them excellent episodes, guys. And then they put 5 stars yet again. So yeah, Dave McPherson, thank you for being a trailblazer, the first of our Audible 5-star reviews. We massively appreciate it. 1, because it's shone a light on the fact that 1, we even were on Audible in the first place, and 2, obviously this is yet another opportunity for us to potentially mine a new and exciting audience of Warhammer 40,000 enthusiasts, because I hear 40k content is quite popular on that there Audible, or at least 40k fanboys and or girls like to use Audible to listen to their various 40k or audio books. So seems like a good place for us to be. So, spread the love, tell your friends, and let's see if we can boost those numbers for all of the aforementioned reasons. Phil, what you got to say to Dave?
Well, thank you, Dave. Mc13, a slightly Squat-esque sounding name.
Any particular reason why that's a
well,
squat?
because dwarves are often associated with Scottish people. And
Okay.
the muck bit is a bit Scottish. Anyway, you can be a space squat mining those 5-star reviews for us, and you've done the very first one on that there mine of Audible. So thank you very much. We appreciate the strong start to our reviews. I appreciate getting top billing as well. So thank you very much. I know Dan will be hurt for the rest of the episode. So even better. Thank you very much.
Exactly. It's nothing but a long, or rather an additional disappointment in the long string of disappointments that has been my life up to this point. So thanks for that, Dave. You've made me feel pretty awful about myself. So
he's wincing.
Yeah.
He's wincing.
Yeah. Exactly. Whatever happens here on in is all your fault. Not that I'm implying I'm going to do anything particular, but if I do, it's on you, Dave. Whatever that might be. Anyway, right. That's that. We're going to get on to talking about squats. Thank you very much to our patrons, without which we wouldn't necessarily be able to do this without shilling to the nines, noting that obviously us talking about patron is in itself a bit of shilling, but hopefully you understand that it is a necessary evil.
That is
because ultimately
the shill paradox.
It is, unfortunately. We have to say thank you to the patrons, because to not acknowledge them would be an awful thing. But then in the doing of, we are essentially advertising the fact that we have a patron, which ultimately serves to undermine the whole reason we have it in the first place, which is to stop us from trying to advertise too aggressively to
I know, but who wants to hear about VPN when you can hear about our lovely Patreon supporters?
Absolutely.
And in fact, we have a special treat for Patreon supporters, but we're going to talk about that in the outro.
We are.
It's a tease.
I mean, when you say we have a special treat, it really kind of potentially makes out that we've done something quite remarkable. But at the time of recording, given the fact that you and me are going out on Friday night, well, yeah, but we're going out Friday night.
Well,
Phil.
it might.
So there's very little chance that this thing will actually be delivered by the time we tease it existing. But sometime soon.
Sometime soon, exactly. Sometime soon. Not this week, probably. Next week.
We'll talk about it in the outro. We'll do that.
Squats
We're going to move on. Squats ahoy! All aboard the land train, as we like to say.
The hype
choo choo. Did you say choo choo, Phil?
Choo choo.
There we go. Right. Transitional noise. Would have been more sensible if I indoctrinated some kind of choo choo into that, but I didn't. It is what it is. Curse you, God, for making me this way. Welcome back, everyone. In this part of the podcast, myself and Phil are going to be talking about those beautiful space dwarfs, those miniature bearded beauties, the squats, everybody. Oh, Phil, the April Fool's joke that actually turned out to be much less of a joke, I suppose.
Yeah, well, let's start off with that, shall we? Like, what did you think to the video and the fact that it was like a double bluff April Fool's that wasn't really an April Fool's?
Well, I mean, I think the reality of the situation is that had they chosen to play the squats as an April Fool card without actually intending to do the squats as a legit release, I think it probably wouldn't have necessarily tracked well. There's a potential for people to be a bit like, oh, super disappointed, really got my hopes up, and da-da-da-da-da. So in a way, I like the double bluff, as it were, the double negative. It's not a double negative in this situation, but I like the idea that they, effectively went, hey, wouldn't this be funny? Well, we best hope not, because it's a real thing. Yay. I mean, what was your vibe on it all?
Well, when I first saw it, I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. And then I was like, oh, it could be April Fool's. And it felt like it was a very cynical marketing ploy to get people just to discuss whether or not it was an April Fool's. And as you say, if it was an April Fool's, I think it would have been a pretty poor move. And the fact that they allowed people to speculate, even for 24 hours, I thought was pretty poor form, because normally they do an April Fool's, and it's obviously an April Fool's. And a lot of the discussion was like, they would have never have spent so much time and effort making a lovely animation for an April Fool's. And then I double checked last year, they actually did an animation for their April Fool's, because it was all about a Primaris Lieutenant, and it used assets and effectively the same art style as the Indomitus Crusade animation. So it obviously repurposed some of that to do this. It's a Primaris Lieutenant again, everyone. So I was like, well, they have put an effort into them, in the past. Normally it's like, here's, paint water or some weird like color, or some gag gift that isn't a real item. Whereas this felt very legit. But it was also like you're tugging on people's heartstrings here, especially long-time fans of Warhammer, people like myself who used to collect squats back in the day. You're tugging on our heartstrings as to whether or not this is real or not. So if it didn't turn out to be, it would have been really disappointing. And it was disappointing that they even allowed, that they put it out there as you said, a bit of a double bluff April Fool's. I didn't like that aspect of it. The video, however, I thought was incredible. I really liked it. And I'm glad at least the next day they did confirm they were legit as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that they did. I think, ultimately it is exciting whenever a new race is coming to 40k. In terms of the video, sure, it was fine. I mean, ultimately, it was a good level of production quality. The reveal of the kind of red outlined figure sort of almost looked like a Castellan robot at first, but obviously held within it the bushy brow and mohawk combo that kind of made it clear that it was more than your average everyday Castellan. And then obviously when it started kind of delivering its comical dwarven dialogue in almost its sort of Eastern European accent, yeah, definitely was interesting. Can I be completely honest though, Phil? Because I feel obliged to be so.
Yeah,
I honestly didn't care. I saw it, I went, oh, cool. Who cares? Like, I genuinely didn't really mind at all. Like, this at this moment in time, the fact that squats are coming about to 40k is about as exciting to me as if something entirely new and made up was coming to 40k. In fact, actually, I'd almost be more excited if something new and made up would go, with no kind of history would come back.
Well, Games Workshop loves to recycle ideas, so it seems inevitable. Like, we had it with Gene Stealer Cult was the last big release that was from the Rogue Trader era days of a race that did exist but hasn't existed for a long time. Sisters of Battle, sort of, but they actually have always been around, but they've just been terribly supported. So that one wasn't such a big an ask as the Gene Stealer Cult or the squats. I think we should just do a brief history of the squats.
Sure.
For if you were listening to this and you're like, what's a squats? And you haven't read the Warhammer community article, they are dwarves in space. Everyone knows what a dwarf is. When they first came onto the scene in Rogue Trader times, they were literally called space dwarves. You also had space orcs and space elves as well. That is how how much Games Workshop thought about their intellectual property and creativity when it came to creating new races. They just ported all their fantasy stuff, with the exception pretty much of Skaven, across into 40k. And we had a few distinct styles of squats, I would say. You had what I would say is the quintessential squat, which has the kind of flak jackets, the quilted armor, the helmet, and I think they had shades as well and las guns, and they were very much I think they were called the Brotherhood or something, and they were I think they all were part of the Astra Militarum army to one degree or another. You had the Marmaduke las guns. They were riding around in rhinos, of all things, back in that era. And squats are, in the 40k lexicon and lore, abhumans. So they're a bit like rattlings and ogrins. They come from high gravity worlds, which is explained why they're so short. And they're obviously into mining and stuff. Classic dwarvy tropes, basically. So they're like the kind of iconic ones, I would say. You also had the slightly weirder versions of Squatch, which was like the leather jacketed biker gang style, which also came sort of alongside them. Like you had these two, one that was very military, one that was like rock and roll punk biker gang. And again, still lots of shades. You've got the bikes, the trikes, and those were like your two sort of main styles. There was some artwork as well that was very much like literal dwarves in space, where they had the Viking helmets, they've all got beards, the chainmail-y type stuff, but just like armed with bolters and stuff, which is almost literal space dwarves. So you've got those as well, but they didn't really have many miniatures along those lines. What else have you got? You've got the exosuits, which is basically like squat Terminators.
Isn't that what the guys at Mantic have really kind of honed in on with their Iron Fathers faction? That's like
I believe so. Yeah, they're much more like heavily armored, and there are
like
tons
mechanized dwarf space people. Yeah.
Yeah, there are tons of like third-party squats floating around, space dwarves. Some going into the different sort of styles of armor. Like a lot of them have the quilted flak armor. A lot of them, as you say, have like this more exosuit, which is sort of looks a bit like a robot. It's like an eggshell, armored eggshell, because they're very rotund. Some of them come on trikes with lances, and then I think you got some on foot as well, basically.
When did they actually become known as squats, though, Phil? Because, I mean, obviously they were space dwarves for the longest time. Was that when they moved over to 2nd edition that they coined the phrase squats for the army? Because I remember in the 2nd edition Codex Index book that came in the 2nd edition box set, the army was very clearly denoted as squats. Was that in that instance, or did it happen before?
I don't know for sure. I suspect they were always called squats, but they were also just marketed as space dwarves as well. So definitely the original. Because I still got the models. I don't have the box, I don't think, sadly. So there used to be a big chunky, like almost square box, and it gave you like 30 plastic squat models, all armed with las guns and flak jackets and helmets and stuff. Super bargain. But almost all identical models, so a bit rubbish in that respect. And that says Space Dwarves emblazoned on it in big letters. I wouldn't be surprised if you could read the back blurb. It probably would mention the word squats, because I think they've always sort of, had it hand in hand. It's like, I think the orcs originally were ORC rather than ORK, referencing the... fancy orcs. I think they were called like space raiders, space orcs, or orc raiders.
I definitely remember there was a raider variant of orc at some point in terms of the language around them. Yeah,
and I think the very initial range was like space orc raider.
Yeah,
and they were again similar to the dwarves, armed with the same weapons as the Imperium. So, las guns, bolters. In fact, I don't really think orcs had las guns per se, but they all, they had a missile launcher, they had bolters. Same with the dwarves. They had las guns, heavy bolters, quite predominantly, plasma, multi-melter, stuff like that. So, which would explain, what we see now is bit more of a reimagined version of what a squat is. It's not a literal, we've just brought them back and we haven't changed anything. It's like how with Gene Stealer Cult, you don't get limousines anymore, even though they had them back in the day. They've kind of taken the overall nugget and concept of what they are and evolved it into something new. So now they're not even really called squats, I guess. They're called Leagues of Votann.
Is that what they've said they're calling them now? The Leagues of Votann.
Yeah, so Leagues of Votann, Votann, is the, I guess, faction name, but it's interesting, like they haven't actually said what the race is actually called. So there's in the article that talks about the history of the squats, it talks about how the term squat is still used, and it references the Necromunda range of minis. So there's currently 2 squats which exist that is a relatively new model, like under 10 years. So they brought out 2 mercenary models for Necromunda, and they are very much archetypals of the old style squats. So we have let me see what they've got. So you've got Grendel Grendelson and Ragnir Gunstein or Gunstein. One of them's like an ammo loader, and one of them's more like a classic mercenary. And they both have very like dwarven vibes. Like they've got the, you know, braided beards and the, you know, the shades and the helmet, like the old style squats. And there they talk about how those are called squats, and it's almost like a slang term for them, and that's how they're referred to on Necromunda.
Okay.
Obviously, we've also got the Demiurge, which kind of came about in Battlefleet Gothic.
Yes.
So, going on a bit of a ramble, what happened ages ago is going back slightly. So we had 40k, we had squats, we had 2nd edition, where I think they were in the original core rulebook index.
Yeah, they were, as I was saying, they were in the index, yeah.
So you had that, but they never got their own codex. They never progressed from there.
Did they not have a white dwarf? No, the white dwarf was the Rogue Trader rule set for them, wasn't it? And then the index became their only rule set for 2nd, I believe.
Yes, yeah, I believe so. And then basically 3rd edition came and went, 4th edition came, and then basically they never appeared again. And
they got squatted, Phil.
Well, that's where the term squatted came from. So before that happened, though, what actually did happen was Epic came about, and that is where the squats kind of got a lot of love, and where I remember buying a lot of my squat models from. So a bit of history, I got squats as my first 40k army. Then I sort of pivoted into Imperial Guard at that time, and this was when I'm probably like 9-10 years old, because I remember a lot of first like Rogue Trader models and stuff, but I never played it. But I definitely played 2nd edition 40k, and then I remember buying all the Epic stuff when that came out, but I barely played it because no one else did. It was a classic, you know, even to this day, what I do is I buy stuff, I get all the models, I, you know, pretend to play them in my head, but then never have anyone to play them with. So that's what I did with my squat army. But that's where like squats properly became their own and they got a bit more defined. And the problem, and I think Jervis Johnson said it, is like the reason why squats became squatted is because they didn't know what to do with them. They couldn't elevate them beyond they're just dwarves in space, but they feel so fantasy. It's like orcs kind of became their own thing. Like they survived the transition. Elves became Elder, and they look very different from, you know, elves in fantasy or Age of Sigmar. It's like the pointy ears is like the only thing. Like there's obviously some similarities, but they're also very distinct. Whereas dwarves in space, the squats didn't really do that, with the exception of Epic, where they kind of got a bit more defined. You had the classic land train, and lots of super heavies like the Overlord, and these big giant artillery pieces, and the gyrocopters. And my favorite one was the Cyclops. So it's like a big Leviathan, if you remember that from the Imperial Guard range, but with a ginormous cannon on it. And that was like their only like really big sort of Titan killing weapon. And that was like my favorite mini out of a lot, I think. So there they kind of became their own. But for 40k, it just didn't really work at the smaller scale. So they got, as they say, squatted. There's apparently some passing passages about how they all got eaten by Tyranids, or that's what it's been alluded to. So that's where the term squatted came from. Everyone thinks they're dead and you're never going to see them again. Fun fact, in fact, I actually went to Warhammer World, or Games Workshop HQ as it then was. I was maybe like 18, 19. I was doing design and tech for my A level, and I actually got to go to Games Workshop, go to behind the scenes, because I was basically doing like miniature casting. I was doing like something for design and tech around miniature casting, because obviously Warhammer was my passion then. So I was like learning the processes, and the CEO like showed me around some of the offices and stuff, and I got to sit down and have a chat with him.
The chief, whatever that means,
I
officer.
mean, in my head at the time, that's who it was. Whether it actually was, I mean, I can't 100% confirm, but I'm pretty sure it was at the time. Like, he was a lovely chap, and I got to sit around and have a chat with him for like 10 minutes, maybe.
Very different time, clearly.
I know, quite impressive. I mean, it might not have been. It might have been like the head of some other department, but
Could have been.
I'm sure it was the CEO at the time.
Could have been the T-boy for all you knew.
Well, I know, but like, I did specific.
Give him the badge. Make this nerd feel better about himself.
I know. But I did specifically ask him about squats, because obviously at that time they were like one of my favorite armies. So I was like, what's happening with the squats? Do you ever like bring them back and stuff? And they basically like, no, like along the lines of, we just didn't know what to do with them in a way that was really exciting. So they're just going to stay where they are, sort of thing. So disappointing news, but
I think as well, though, if you look at it within the kind of timeline, right? Like, you know, second edition kind of came and went, and they didn't find a reason to release a book for them. You know, they managed to do Sisters, they managed to do, you know, everything that they sort of did in that edition. But I guess as it kind of rolled on towards its kind of inevitable conclusion, they didn't do squats. And they probably didn't do that for the reasons that you've stated already. They just couldn't think about it. And they probably were thinking, oh, third edition, maybe it's something to add in. But obviously they leaned heavily into Marines and then Drakari early doors, or Dark Elder as they were back then. And then before you know it, I guess 2 whole editions have gone on, and you just get to a point where you're like, this has just gone too far. We just, you know, because again, you forget how different Games Workshop was back then in terms of the resources they had available to them, the rate of releases that they were able to do, and also now Marines are still as important to the business as they've probably ever been. But I feel like Marines back in the early years of like 40k were even more important, because they were such a successful line that they probably always had to kind of be like, well, Elder do okay, so we'll keep supporting that. Tyranids do okay, so we'll keep supporting that. We just did Tau in 3rd edition, and maybe early doors Tau didn't necessarily set the world on fire. Maybe they saw that Tau didn't, you know, do the business for them. So they're like, you know what? Let's just focus on fleshing out these ranges and systematically releasing more Marine stuff, because we know that sells, much like how they systematically always updated like Chaos Warriors and Dwarfs for fantasy, because that was obviously what did well in those spaces. So I guess it just became one of those things that the business, such as it was, just kind of never had the capacity to prioritize it until now, obviously.
Yeah, I get a feeling it's one of those things where if someone was really passionate about it and an avid like squat fan, they would have either sculpted some minis off their own back or written some rules and gone, here we go, I've done it. Like, do you want to publish this or make these minis? And they'd probably be like, oh, cool, looks great. Or like, oh no, it's awful, get rid of it. And like a lot of those, you know, quintessential things are done like that in people's spare time. Like Blood Bowl was made outside of Games Workshop and was like Jervis Johnson's pitch to Games Workshop, from what I remember. And it's like, and they were like, that's brilliant, cool, like come on board. And they used it. It's, you know, a lot of the stuff hasn't been developed on company time, which, you know, could be seen as quite a bad thing by modern day business practices.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think I think that kind of passion should be applauded. And obviously,
completely.
If people like Jervis Johnson were actually benefiting from, you know, creating a game and pitching it to GW and seemingly were rewarded accordingly, which I'm sure back then he probably was, then fair enough. You know, I think, Yeah, absolutely. You know, but again, different parts of that company's history, different time, different expectations. You know, I mean, obviously, yeah, just different context, I suppose. But no, I mean, I'm interested because the thing is, you mentioned there like, oh, passion and enthusiasm. Do you feel like Games Workshop are passionate about bringing back the squats, or do you feel like they've just having to succumb to the sort of inevitable community peer pressure on this one? Is this one of these projects that's kind of born out of more about, oh, people in the community won't shut up about it, so we have to do it? Or do you genuinely feel like they actually now have come to a point where someone within the business has been like, no, I'm actually super passionate about this and this is something I'm driving for because I really care?
I hope it's that. Although if we think about the three memeable things when you hear the words reset the clock, which, you know, even now you probably don't hear it as much anymore, but basically whenever anyone asks Games Workshop when a Plastic Sister's coming, there would be the reset the clock meme. Or if anyone asked about squats, it'd be reset the clock, because obviously it's like it's never going to happen, and every time you ask it, that clock gets reset. And the only other thing out of those sort of most iconic, most requested, let's say, things was a plastic Thunderhawk. So effectively 2 out of the 3 most whingy community comments or questions are, you know, 2 of them have now been done. And obviously a plastic Thunderhawk has been created in Aeronautica. I almost don't think we would ever see it in 40k scale. But who knows at this rate? If they're giving us squats, who generally knows? So we, as I said, going back to the timeline, the Demiurge came around in Battlefleet Gothic, and they were very squat-like. They were miners. They were short. And they mention them in this new article, and they're very much allied to Tau, and have given technology to Tau. And it's like, okay, are these squats? Maybe not. They might be. What might be interesting is that you might find the Leagues of Votann are a faction, a collective of, let's say, squats for in terms of the race, because we don't actually know what they are. Maybe they're called kin potentially. That is one of them. And then because they're basically seen as pre-Age of Strife technology humans that left Earth thousands of years ago, but have managed to like retain a lot of that technology, which is interesting in itself. But essentially the Demiurge is a splinter off of that. So, you know, they are squats as well, but they're their own race, and they're the ones that have allied themselves closely with the Tau, and the Leagues of Votann haven't. And it'll be interesting because it'll be like a Xenos race, but they're not really Xenos. They're sort of humans as well. Well, they're abhumans, I guess. So there'll be a nice, interesting interplay and relationship between the Leagues of Votann with the Imperium, and then but potentially with Tau as well, if they have close ties with them. And finding out whatever the law is going to be for this race, I think, will be super interesting. But as to your question, yeah, I really think someone would be doing it because they're passionate about it. And I actually think Caradron Overlords is the thing that's made them realize, oh, we can actually do dwarves without them being really tropey dwarves. Like Caradron Overlords, they're still short, they're still miners, but it's like they're mining in the sky. Like, mind blown gif, everyone. Like, that is a phenomenal, crazy concept. And they are still iconically dwarves, but they're not dwarves at the same time. They're not what you think about. They're not the Warhammer Fantasy or Lord of the Rings style dwarves. It's like a completely high concept of what dwarves could be. And I feel like that has probably opened the door to them going, actually, no, we can do squats in a completely different way. And I think they also have to do it in a different way for IP reasons, right? And as we said, there's so many third parties out there that do classic squats. I think they've gone, we have to do something different and reinvent them and be look completely different.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think again, it's interesting, isn't it? Right, because you won't know this, Phil, because you haven't gotten around to reading or listening to Horus Heresy books. But there's an interesting sequence of events in the opening trilogy where Horus encounters a race of humans who, obviously, during the events of all the various things that happened before the great sort of, universal crusade that the Imperium is launched on to try and reunite humanity, they encounter these humans that are living in relative kind of synergy with other sort of Xenos races, and basically the armors that these individuals wear have a number of kind of commonalities with what Space Marines are, because as it sort of transpires within the storyline, they have access to one of those STCs, the templates, as it were, and the kind of anecdote is made that all these standard construct templates, so SCTs or whatever they're called, they have a certain kind of blunt functionality in the way that they kind of do stuff. So even though it is different from a Marine, it still obviously has certain kind of similarities. And I think what's interesting in terms of the way they've kind of designed, or what you can see of this squat warrior that they've revealed so far, is it's clear that it's got certain kind of tonal kind of similarities to a Marine, in so much as it's got the power packs, the power armor, the bulky shoulders, the kind of armor plating that you would associate with this. But in a lot of respects as well, I noticed in the artwork, definitely has a lot of almost like Spire style cues. So if you remember the larger kind of like melee bruisers from the Spire, who I've completely forgotten the name of. I think they're like the Ori or something. I've forgotten what the big bruiser ones, because you had the fly one, you had the assassin-y one, and then you had the punchy ones.
I know.
It feels like
yes.
But it feels like there's some of those design cues there. And then even those, the Spire gang from Necromunda were always interesting, because there was always statements being made that, it's actually Tau that made those suits of armor, or or it was like traded for with like alien Xenos races or whatever. And maybe again, there's all these nice little design cues. So I mean, there's a lot in it in terms of like what it is. And actually, to your point though as well, I'm really intrigued to see what these guys are in relation to the Imperium. If they are actually, what we're seeing is a new, air quotation, human style race, but one that is actually not of the Imperium, one that actually is essentially what a human species could be if it isn't held back by all of the, concerns and issues of the Imperium's history, as it were. So the idea that these are, abhumans all being, said, but humans that have effectively have embraced technologies and utilized, more kind of what we would more broadly understand and recognize as like sci-fi tropes, to be a much more kind of almost Tau-esque race, but humans.
Yeah, well, funny enough, I was chatting with Richie, just the old quizmaster himself, just before this call, and he came up with a similar idea. I'm pretty sure it was him, and it's basically like, what if the leagues of Votann aren't just squats, and they are one of many races, a bit like the Federation in Star Trek? And as you say, maybe it's a bit too close to what Tau was meant to be. Lots of different races forming together to form a coalition, and squats had just happened to be one of them, which would be a cool idea, although I do think it may be a bit too similar to what the Tau were before everyone just was like riptides and battle suits and forget about all the other kind of cool races like the Kroots. So I don't think it would necessarily be that, but it's a cool concept of what it is. And I think even that, the concept of like, they're called the leagues, right? So it's clearly different groups, and I think that harks back into the history. So dwarves in Warhammer Fantasy, they were all kind of like independent So they all lived in Carracks, which were like underground strongholds, and that's where they did all their mining. And they kind of didn't really care about anyone else. Obviously, you had the Dwarf King, who kind of led them all when they needed to all rally together, but otherwise they were quite independent. And then you get the Caradron Overlords, and they have a similar thing where I can't remember the exact terminology, but they are effectively all independent, like skyports, doing their own thing, but they all follow a code, and they can, again, they have a bit more of like a federation or coalition to sort of do the rules and the laws, like the code in air quotes, for how they should follow stuff. And one of them, I believe, is like basically sky pirates and a bit more of an outlaw from the rest of them. And that would be quite interesting if we see that here as well. So it might be the League, as you say, is like independent mining operations, but the League is like the council that rules over them. And maybe we have like a bit more of a space pirate-esque dwarf as one of the sub-factions from all the others. There's loads of possibilities in terms of how they might do that, and what they might become. In terms of the technology, that lots of people are saying, because it predates the Age of Strife, we might see the Men of Iron, or like kind of crazy robots and other like really like high-tech weaponry. So the Van Saar apparently also sort of have similar like pre-Age of Strife technology, which is why they're very kind of like classic sci-fi. Like they don't look very 40k. Tau also don't look very 40k, and these guys don't particularly look very 40k as well, because that's what I think the technology used to look like back in those days. So it feels like there is a design philosophy in terms of how old technology looked versus how it now looks. Like if we look at the actual squat character, like the gun has some elements that makes me think Tau, like the little circular bit at the back, like that little detail looks a bit like some of the circular detail that you get on the Tau weaponry. It also looks exactly like some of the detail you see on the Demiurge ships. But then the sort of underslung, angled, like fuel canister looks a lot like Hellblasters for the Primaris range, and the kind of neck piece around the guy looks like the Gravis armor, like the new style Gravis that they did recently, that doesn't have the hood. So like the heavy intercessors, for example, it looks a bit like that. And there was a really cool fan theory that I like, and it was like, and it's a bit of a retcon. It's like, what if Belisarius Cawl didn't invent all of this cool technology that the Primaris now are, but instead he like stole it from the squats, because they have access to all this super old Age of Strife technology.
I mean, it certainly wouldn't be outside the realms of possibility, and again would create some interesting kind of dynamics in terms of obviously how the Imperium would potentially interpret that if they came in contact with these squats and then realized that there's a great deal of similarities between what these individuals are, going to war in and or with, and how that then compares to the new ranges of Primaris arsenals and things. And again, people like Roberto Guilliman, who obviously very much has been willing to seemingly make changes to aspects of his father's grand plan. It'd be interesting to sort of understand within the narrative how far someone like that would push it, and if it was that they became confronted with the fact that actually what Belisarius Cawl has done is very sort of underhanded or what have you, then potentially there is an interesting potential there for, I'm going to say, if it was going to be a Marine Civil War, they're going to be like, do away with all these Primaris lot. They're all heretics. Bring back the firstborn.
I mean, potentially. I feel like it almost like if they did it, it would be quite an ingenious retcon to the Belisarius Cool story. Because everyone, well, not everyone, a lot of people, especially people online, really hate the concept of I just came up with Primaris Marines from nowhere, even though I had 10,000 years to create it. But if it kind of explains it as it's not just one person who's like a bit of a mad genius and that he maybe stole or bought some of the technology from elsewhere, that you can now kind of go, yeah, this has always existed in the canon, even though it hasn't because it's new. It's like Gene Stealer cult, like they haven't really been around. But then the way they're introduced is, it's always been here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it'd be cool if they did that. I mean, they don't have to. It'll be interesting to see. Yeah, I'm just so keen to see what they do with like where they exist, what they do, how they have meant to have been interacting with humanity all this time, or the other races. It'll be yeah.
I mean, I'm
super
fine with
exciting.
them. I'm fine with them just turning up. You know, it's like
as if they were like brand new, like, oh, we've just been in hiding all this time, or we've a bit like Tyranids, we've just rocked up in the galaxy.
Yeah, I'd be fine with that. I'd be absolutely fine with that. Like they were pushed out to the furthest fringes of wherever. You know, maybe they're more, you know, from the western side of the galaxy as it is mapped. And just they just happen to sort of come along at last for whatever reason. Maybe it's something to do with the old maledictum thingy-babib or Citrix maledictum.
Well, there's always been warp storms around, even predating the big Cicatrix maledictum. That
maybe they're from the past, Phil. Maybe that's the thing. Maybe they are actually
time travelers.
They're time travelers. Maybe that's what they are. Maybe they have been warp stormed. Maybe it was like, you know, a series of fleets of these guys have all been kind of, and maybe that's why they disappeared. They were torn out of time and space and have now returned through weird cosmic happenings. You know?
I mean, that could be the case.
I mean, I'd be fine with that. I mean, that's something that, I mean, don't get me wrong, time travel is a very, very difficult narrative device to do well, but at the same time, the warp has and does time travel people all the time. Like, you know, there are many instances of legionnaires appearing now going, oh, just yesterday I was on Terra trying to blow up this place, and now I'm 10,000 something odd years in the future. Crikey, you know, it's, you know, that sort of stuff happens all the time. So, and what a wonderful way to kind of, you know, potentially proposition the fact they disappeared. It's like they did disappear because they were, because the forces of chaos or what have you blinked them out of existence and brought them back. Or maybe they predate the Emperor, something crazy like that, you know, going for the old Star Wars statement of a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. These guys, you know, come from who knows where. And I think, you know, that would be an interesting thing to add to 40k, something that kind of erodes some of those kind of baked in kind of Imperium ideals. I think if you have other kind of human-esque factions that have a completely different methodology to the Imperium in terms of how they operate and go around doing things, I think that's going to be interesting. If these guys are a more kind of humanitarian, more you know, more rational, less sort of generally crazy force like the Imperium.
It's 40k, they're probably going to be bloodthirsty murderers like all the other races.
But it would be interesting to kind of inject some, you know, modern day sensibilities into the IP, just to sort of see how weirdly it clashes with the, you know, with the overarching kind of grim darkness of it all. You know, I just sort of find it quite funny because again, they tried really hard to do that with the Tau, but unfortunately, over time, they realized that really, much to your point, like really what Tau are is like a mech army that people like because they get to take big robots. And over time, they just sort of went, yeah, the greater good was a cool concept when we first wrote it, but over time, we've just eroded it into, yeah, it's just evil. It's like, okay, cool. But it started out really interesting when it was like, we're just trying to be nice. We want you to join us. Let's all get together.
But because I do remember when we read the codex, or when I was reading it as part of the review. In summary, it's yes, the great good. We want you to join us, but if you don't, we're just going to conquer you.
Yes,
those are your two choices. It's like, that's not good. They're not the nice guys. This isn't like, a lovely communist utopia. It's nothing like that at all. It's like, it's just another form of evil, basically.
Yes, yeah. I think that's the thing, though. I think, look, it's definitely interesting to get a new army added to 40k. Like I said, in terms of the actual reveal itself, it really left me completely... I had no feelings towards it whatsoever, right? Like, I don't want to be ridiculous when I make those statements. It's just more a case of I looked at it and went, sure, cool, a new thing.
This is the thing. So I looked at it and was like, I want to see more. I already want more. So one thing that not many people have talked about is in the reveal, like, you see all these silhouettes of other models. So there's definitely one with a pickaxe on his backpack. There's one that looks like he's maybe got a shoulder-mounted, like, either light or a gun or something. And then there's one that's got, like, a weird curved thing coming out over his head from his backpack, which I presume is going to be the squad leader. But who knows how that will look. I do remember back in squad days, you had Heathguard, which were, like, elite warriors. So potentially it's one of them. Like, obviously, this is, like, your bog-standard trooper, or at least that's the assumption, right? So it'd be interesting to see what everything else. I want to see what vehicles are going to look like. I want to see what flyers or robots, or I want to see the whole range of units before I can go, oh, this is really cool. Because at the moment, I think it's a cool concept. I want to see how they deal with the background and the lore. But I want to see more models in the range before I can definitely go, they've done this right. Because potentially, like, this is a great model, but then they do some real bloopers and it'll put me off wanting to get the army.
I don't doubt Games Workshop are going to deliver great quality miniatures, right? Like, I think, even though I'm not, this miniature is not to my taste. There is nothing that appeals to me about this miniature, right? Like, it's got a weird sort of stocky stature. There's just nothing that really it does nothing for me. But I can understand that a lot of people get excited about it.
You're not a dwarf fan, clearly. I am.
Mate, I love the Caradon Overlords. That is a gorgeous range. Like, I will give all the credit in the world to the Caradon Overlords, or Cadron Overlords,
and
or whatever they're called.
Here's the thing, I wonder how similar they're going to be. And obviously, it feels like even the suit style is a bit inspired from, like, the jumpsuits that the Caradon Overlords have got. But because here's the thing, I saw this and was like, okay, I had plans to do my Minotaurs, and I've got my Thunder Warriors as a concept to work on. But I saw this and was like, I'm potentially going to drop everything and buy a squat army because it's squats. And it's like, I've always liked squats. My first ever army was dwarves in fantasy. Then I got squats in 40k. Then I got squats in epic. And then, there have been no more squats. And then when AOS came round, Caradon Overlords became a thing. I was like, oh, I could get on board with this. And now there's squats actually in 40k proper. I'm like, cool. But here's the thing, it's like, if the range isn't that great for some reason, and it kind of puts me off, it's like, I could just go, okay, if I'm ever going to be convinced by, like, you and Tim to play AOS, I can just do squats there with Caradon Overlords, because they could be very similar. I can kind of tickle that itch with Caradon Overlords. I don't need squats in 40k necessarily. However, I kind of want them. So that's my kind of only reservation of, as much as I really want to drop everything and get them, I want to see more before I commit to it. And it's like when Genestealer Cult came, they were another one that is, like, iconically old school 40k, and I was like, oh, I want to get into Genestealer Cult. Like, they look at all the models, bloody amazing. Rules were, like, really cool and interesting. I think the thing that put me off is, like, they were just so detailed, so beautiful, and so many of them is, you needed to buy a lot. I was just like, oh, I can't do an army that's like involving lots and lots of models. I want like a nice small elite force that I can, get as an army. And potentially I sort of feel like squats could do that for me in terms of what I want out of an army for 40k. So I'm really excited by them.
It's amazing, man. I'm happy for you, mate. I mean, I think that's the thing. It's like it's great for the people that are super excited about this, that they've got something to be super excited about. And I was exactly the same with the newer Craftworld stuff. It just really, hit the spot in terms of what I was looking for, in terms of new models and new ideas within that range. And it definitely has delivered for me in that regard. And it's great that this potentially will do that for you. I know that there are a lot of people out there who still, burn a candle for squats. I've seen people play at events with their heavily converted squat armies, or people who go so far as to actually track down, buy, and utilize, old school squat miniatures.
Yeah, so
and use them as pods.
RFW, I played against a guy who had an old squat army, and it was a mixture of like some converted bits, but some of them were like super rare squat models. And that is a labor of love, so it's like super impressive. So I think there are people that have always gone, I'm just still going to play squats, even if they're not in the game. I'm going to just run them as something else. And it's like, that's totally cool. But won't it be great now you got kind of actual rules?
Absolutely. Can't wait to see their massive land train model. That's where it's going to. That's when it's really going to kick off, mate. Once that land train gets going, we'll be all aboard the land train.
All aboard the land train, toot toot. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what they do. What they hark back from the old stuff is like the bikes and the trikes. Even though I had some of those models as a kid, were naff. Like, I don't want them in new squats. It's like the biker gang stuff. Really, I think that was the lame bit that they just felt didn't work, because that was trying to move them away from the mining dwarves.
Okay.
And I think that's a bit that they felt like just didn't work, doing that whole kind of punk biker gang stuff. So I don't really want to see bikers and trikes, even though that was quite iconic for squats back in those days. The land train, the Cyclops, the gyrocopters were really cool. Like, how they would make those, because they were all like epic miniatures, how they would make that work in 40k, I don't know. If you could pull off that sort of vibe on a smaller scale, and I think that was their whole problem in the first place. So even if they don't have that, like if these are kind of very clean Tau style 40k models, it's like they're just space miners or privateers and explorers or mercenaries maybe, and like that is it. And they've got a bit of mining aesthetic because they're dwarves at the end of the day. That would be enough with me. There was I can't remember the name of the guy who did it, but it was maybe like 5-6 years ago, maybe even longer. There was like quite an infamous blog, or maybe just famous. It was just a really cool blog of this guy doing squats, using, I think, bits of dwarves from the old fantasy range, because this predates AOS, and I think maybe Space Marines or something. And he did some really cool vehicles. It was like this really chunky rectangular, almost like a flying brick with like grav plates on the bottom and stuff, and like a little turret bit at the top with a guy on it. And it was really like brutalist, like in terms of its style, like really like just functional, like, and it looked amazing. And I sort of hope they do that kind of concept, like they kind of, they don't, I don't want to see too many nods and winks to the old stuff for the sake of it. It's like, if they can make it work, then brilliant. But I'd be quite happy if they just ditched it all and gone, yeah, these are space dwarves and we're going to do a brand new take on them, like they did with kind of Caradron Overlords. Like, they completely redid the book. It's like, I don't need to see braided hair or the quilted flak jackets. It's like they've already done that with the Necromunda models, and I think there's enough room in the lore for those to all exist. So the Leagues of Votann are a particular type of squats, that are like the main faction race. But yeah, the Demiurge might be a splinter of that, and they're like the Tower one. You've got the mercenaries on Necromunda, and it's like, yeah, they're just like squat mercenaries that have like left their worlds or left the league, right? And they're doing their own thing, and they look different for different reasons, and maybe there are multiple like sub factions of squats, and each one has a different style potentially, like how you get Catachan and Krieg and stuff. Like they could all exist in the lore, but this is what we're seeing as the army, right? So I think that's, you know, there's scope for it all to work out in its own way.
Yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? And again, it's early days, and that's what's really exciting, I suppose, about this is because, you know, again, to harken back to the first existence of the Tau in third edition and what they've gone on to become, the reintroduction of GSC and what that range has become, the reintroduction of AdMech, Imperial Knights. You know, there's just been so much evolution of those armies since their, you know, in some instances, relatively humble beginnings. I mean, you know, Imperial Knights, when they first dropped, was one kit with two variations that has gone on to become not just an Imperial Knight army, but also a Chaos Knight army, which is heavily supported by Forge World, heavily supported by other things. And that's what's really exciting, I suppose, is that it does unlock really great potential. And I think, obviously, when this army builds momentum and starts to actually have lots of really interesting new elements added to it and starts to expand, maybe we will see Chaos Squats again. I know that was a thing back in the day. Maybe those will come around, and that could be super interesting.
Yeah, you had Chaos Dwarves in fantasy were like really iconic and quite unique as a, like they weren't anything like the old Lord of the Rings stuff. They were like completely different. And yeah, so Chaos Squats did exist, but they weren't like a huge range or anything, but they existed. And it's like they could do them. But then back in those days, they also did Chaos Orcs and Chaos Gene Stealer Cult. Like everything had a Chaos version of it pretty much. So they might not do it for this, but it's definitely an option. Like that would be quite cool.
Would be very cool. I think that's it though, isn't it? I think that's the potential awesomeness of this, is that what it can become, not necessarily what it is out of the gate. Because I think, you know, again, to go back to the humble beginnings of it, you know, GSC were effectively, you know, the contents of that board game where it was Death Watch versus GSC combined with a few very basic kits.
I want to say Death Watch Overkill, but I don't know if that's...
Yes, you're right. It's Death Watch Overkill, yeah. So it was Death Watch Overkill kits, which was for a long time the only way you could get the Aberrants.
Well, then... fun fact, that is still the only way you can get that particular set of Aberrants, because they did a separate Aberrant box, but completely different sculpts. Weird.
Yes. Yeah. But the thing is like, well, I mean, everything in that box is the only way you can get those specific builds, because even like the hybrids, you can't even, like, without that box, you can't get the old style. Oh no, you can buy
the Patriarch Magus is a separate sprue, yeah,
and whatever that one guy's called, the Sword Lad.
I don't think he was in that one.
He was in Overkill, yeah. But anyway, look, we're going off on a tangent on that point. My point is that, you know, humble beginnings of that relatively small thing, heavily leaned on the guard range to flesh it out, essentially upgrade sprues and other things to try and basically make that more meaningful. You know, Skitarii in the early instances was Skitarii Rangers, Vanguard, an Onaga June Crawler, Lancers, and the Iron Strider. Like, I mean, and that was it. Oh no, I think they also had Rust Stalkers and Infiltrators, but that was it early doors. So it's always interesting to see what those Rangers go on to be.
Yeah,
obviously in the case of Skitarii, they also then added AdMech, but blah blah blah.
Yeah, I suspect what we'll get is something similar to Sisters of Battle, like a pretty sizable range year one, and then the following year, like the follow up to that. And it's like we said it about the Elder refresh, like you got a bunch of plastic new models this year. I suspect you'll get the rest of your Elder plastics next year, and I sort of feel like that's what we get with squats or leagues of Votann. So we get a bunch this year, probably at some point either in between we get maybe a kill team unit as well thrown in, because every faction seems to be getting its own kill team. And then the following year we get a follow-up range which might have like maybe bigger models, more models. It'd be interesting to see what they do with them. And maybe this is like the start of, maybe it's going in the way of AOS, where AOS just has tons and tons of different factions that have relatively small model counts, and they just seem to, it's actually, I'm trying to think, it's been a while probably since I've actually done a new AOS faction, but it felt like for a while they were just churning them out non-stop and they weren't ever going to stop. And so it's like, just keep creating more and more factions, right? And it feels like maybe 40k is going to go in that direction, where they'd be like, let's just create a bunch of really good small factions. So this might not be the last of new stuff for 40k.
Yeah, I'm in favor of that. I think taking an Age of Sigmar style approach where you're actually consistently releasing new and interesting things that explore other little kind of nuances of the broader fluff, lore, what have you. Yeah, I'm dead in favor of that. So that's cool to see. But yeah, look, I mean, this is the thing, to continue to kind of attempt to quantify my statement around the fact that I didn't care that much about it. Obviously it's exciting when new stuff comes along. It's just that, for whatever reason, this one just really didn't grab my attention, and has not yet done so in any meaningful way. It's been really fun debating it with people, really fun talking with people about the possibilities that this represents, but the actual kind of announce just left me a bit cold. I was like, oh, okay, cool, squads, yeah, great. Like, I definitely wasn't in the Phil camp where I was like, oh my god, I've waited my whole life.
Well, that's the thing. If you're not of basically my age, like, you probably won't even know. Well, you might know about them, but you won't like care. You've got no attachment to them. So as a new player, I could quite easily see why people would just look at them and be like, nah, whatever. They're kind of short humans, right? Oh, dwarves, right? Oh, okay. Like, cool. And as you like, let's be honest, like that model is quite generic in a way. It's like a very generic sci-fi type model. It looks a bit Space Marines. It looks a bit Tau. And to be fair to the designers, that could be a deliberate design choice based on like their in-world lore of where all this technology comes from. I assume they think about that sort of stuff. That's what I would want to do if I was developing a race. I would be like, where does it fit within the universe? Which races have access to which technology, especially if you're talking about time periods, because they're saying they have a lot of heretical technology according to the Mechanicum, because their technology is so old, right? Even though that's the technology that a lot of the Martians are trying to get via lost SDCs and stuff. So I assume they've gone, this is the design philosophy of what those weapons used to look like. So, and now how have they evolved to look like how they do? But yeah, it kind of has a bit of a bland, generic sci-fi vibe to it, I guess. It's yeah, I don't know. They could have taken them in a kind of crazy, grim, dark sort of vibe to them. But I'm sort of happy with what it is. I like the simplicity of it is appealing, because I sort of, if I am going to get them, it's like I want something nice and easy to paint. I don't want something cluttered with loads of detail. But then maybe like the Warlord and HQ options will be a bit crazy looking, and it'd be a bit more personalized, because obviously the bog standard Primaris Intercessor, really basic. And I personally like that, but I know other people don't. But then you look at the captains and lieutenants, and they're much more adorned with other bits and pieces. And yeah, so the other thing is, like, a lot of the old squat stuff always feels like it's been repurposed. So squats were basically like a bit like Viking-ish. They had beards, ginger hair. They had ancient runes for like their language and stuff. And all of those elements have kind of been nicked by the Space Wolves and sort of repurposed by them. The concept of the mining, that's kind of still very unique to the dwarves, but a lot of like they're kind of
Well, I mean, that's kind of been taken by the GSC.
Oh god,
though,
you're right. Yeah, so the mining concept is now GSC, and a lot of their old weapons and like the names of their weapons and stuff have been reused. So like the Thud gun became an Imperial Guard, because that was like, so the 4-barreled Thud guns now become the quad launcher from Forge World for the Krieg. They had a mole launcher, which again has become a weapon for the Krieg. They had like, I don't know, like the gyrocopters, I guess, are a bit similar to the bird stuff, bird flyers by the AdMech to an extent.
Oh, what you mean
Ornithopters.
the actual
I mean,
yeah.
just the concept of a gyrocopter. I mean, it is slightly different still from them, but I think a lot of their stuff that was very like iconically squats has been reused and repurposed by other factions and races. So it's like,
yeah, agreed.
They can't really use those. I mean, I think they still do a bit of the mining. It'd be cool if they're more like scavengers going around space hulks, a bit like what that the intro video implies. Like they're not just mining for rock on a planet. They're kind of mining by like looting effectively. That might be a nice sort of novel twist in terms of like the take on what they're doing. A bit like the Caradron Overlords, like they're mining the sky. It's like these guys are mining, but mining, ships.
The warp.
Who knows? Yeah, like they could do all sorts of all sorts of things with them.
I'm sure they will do. I think that's it, isn't it? It's exciting that there is a new race coming to 40k. I would have preferred it to have been the Exodites.
I mean, they might. They're on the cards.
One day soon. One day soon. Exactly. That's it. I think, the squads are cool. I think there's a lot of potential interesting stuff with it. I think the history of the race and what it represents within the broader hobby is super interesting. So I think, long story short, it's exciting. I think it's cool. I think it's, conceptually an exciting thing to see happen within 40k. Not necessarily something that has blown me away thus far, as I consistently say, because I want to make sure that I'm consistent with that message. But again, I'm excited to see what it could be in the future. So, I look forward to that gun he's wielding being range 30, strength 5, AP -2, flat 3 damage or something.
What would you speculate the stat line for the squat to be?
Movement 5, weapon skill, ballistic skill 3+, strength 3, toughness 5. 2 wounds, initiative. Oh wait,
there's
we're
no
not playing
initiative.
that game anymore. No initiative. Sorry, everyone. Sorry. What comes after when the initiative's gone? It's just leadership, isn't it? Or attacks?
Oh, if you haven't done attacks, then
1 attack and leadership 8, I guess. Well, leadership 7 and 8, so sergeants. In fact, no, I reckon for them they'll all be leadership 8. Because I reckon they'll be weird and their leaders will...
Because they're collective.
Because it just speaks to their kind of dwarf... So there is no... Their sergeant has no sort of inherent benefit other than extra attacks. And then armor save 3+.
I think it's 4+. I think it's carapace, not power armor. Because he's not fully covered.
There's a clear...
He's got some...
Yeah, but there's a clear power pack on it, for goodness sake. How can that not be power armor?
Yeah, right. If you're in a power armored loincloth, it doesn't make it a 3+ save, though.
Well, what good would a powered armored loincloth be, Phil? Be realistic.
Well,
unless it's some kind of aid for some kind of other, nefarious thing. It doesn't make any sense, does it?
But he's not fully, like, power armor is...
You went there, Phil. You introduced the idea.
It's going to become a t-shirt, everyone. I can say it right now.
Exactly. Why doesn't it just become a loincloth?
Because it's got a little power pack on the back.
Yeah, a little battery pack on a loincloth, yeah. But what does that battery pack do?
Opens up
there you go. Buy one to find out.
Yes. Anyway, I don't think it would be power armor because it's not all encompassing. Because it doesn't completely cover his body.
Yeah, but he could have like some kind of exoskeleton over the underneath the
Well,
fabric.
I think
kind of,
I think the
bits.
exo armor is something we probably will see later on, which will be like Terminator style armor. I think you're roughly right on the stats. I don't know if they're both the weapon skill, ballistic skill 3+. One of them might be 4+, depending on whether they want to make them.
Games Workshop are unimaginative with that stuff. If you give them ballistic skill 3+, with the way the game is, you're going to give him weapon skill 3+, but you'll reduce the quantity of attacks. You'll make them like one attack rather than
attack seems fair. I think,
and then toughness 5 to make them as tough as an orc.
Yeah, I was thinking toughness 4.
Dwarves should be orky sort of. 5, totally 5.
Toughness 5.
They've given they have crazily given fire dragons in the Craftworld book toughness 4, which by elf standards is madness. So if they can start justifying variants of elves being toughness 4, they can sure as heck, give these guys toughness 5.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how broken they are based on all the other codexes so far.
I don't think they'll be broken. I just think, again, it depends, because it feels to me, for a model that appears with that kind of, because again, it's 32mm base model by the looks of things, very, very stocky. It's going to be slow. It's going to be much more kind of short range based on the appearance of the weaponry. So I think it's just going to be a slow sort of mid-range army that hits like a truck, kind of like the inverse of Death Guard, although still inheriting elements of the Death Guard. It's like it's tough and it's slow, but it's much more sort of shooting orientated, whereas Death Guard feel quite, well, to be fair, Death Guard are quite sort of hoardy, demon engine-y kind of army, aren't they? I mean, the stuff in Death Guard that's really awesome is either the various forms of melee-based Terminators or their silly, war machines.
The little bitey vehicles are pretty mad.
The little bitey vehicles, as I discovered. Again, if only I knew what those things were capable of at the start of the game, I would have been much more aggressive. Anyway, we're talking about that in the outro. So I don't know, man. I mean, again, who could say for sure what these guys are going to turn out to be? But I think it'll
be interesting if there's like not necessarily a mercenaries rule, but if there's a mechanic that allows you to ally them into an Imperium army or a Tau army. Or do you think they're just going to be...
I don't want them to have anything to do...
Do you want them to be standard?
Yeah, they have to be standard. I want them to be a Xenos race.
Fair enough.
For all intents and purposes.
I'd be quite happy with that.
I don't want them to be allied with the Imperium. The Imperium already has enough going on. It doesn't need yet another ally. And it diminishes them. If you make them another Imperium faction, it's like, great. This is about as exciting as more Imperium stuff could ever be. I'd be much more in favor of them just being like a Necron Orc standalone thing. And also, by the way, I'm aware for anyone who heard me say that I think they're like the inverse of Death Guard and then basically proceeded to say, oh no, they're kind of exactly the same. I appreciate that was a dumb statement. The point is they're kind of like Death Guard, but they're not vehicle based, they're more kind of infantry based, I guess.
Yeah, it's a bit like with Caradhran Overlords, where they've got lots of they're all about like their kind of big flying ships. I kind of would like these guys to be quite vehicle heavy.
You just wanted to be Caradhran Overlords in space,
sort of, but
I mean that's not bad. That's not a bad
because
thing.
I guess you need to partly set them apart from all the other races in terms of their play style. Do you want to have them just like tougher version of Imperial Guard with vehicles and some infantry? I mean, maybe that could be cool. But personally, for me, because I love painting vehicles. And as I always say, I want a low model count army so I can actually justify buying them and painting them. And it doesn't take me 4 years to do. I want something that I can do relatively quickly. So having lots of big things that I could paint up would be really cool. I mean, people have been speculating about the Men of Iron coming back as maybe a part of their force. That would be really cool, and a way of setting them apart. So it's like, yeah, you've got your couple of squads of squats, you've got a couple of vehicles, and then you've got potentially like a horde of robots at their side that they're controlling or somehow allied with. That would actually be quite a novel way of taking them into a completely different direction from every other race. That could be quite cool.
Yeah, I'm totally fine with that. I think if obviously they do go kind of vehicle heavy, then I suppose that would be an interesting move for them to make. But we'll see. I mean, again, it's all speculation at this point. Now, Phil, I understand in order to pad out this segment, we asked our friendly friends, the Lookout Sir community, to, issue comments or ask questions of what we reckon about squats. So it makes sense to me, at least, that we take ourselves over to our social media platforms and or read what it is our friends in the community have to say. What do you reckon?
We're definitely not padding anything out. We just want to engage with our audience, Dan.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yes, I need to use the correct terminology. I mean, we have already kind of spoken for over an hour on this topic without the need for community questions. I did feel like we'd probably get to them within like a half hour, but yet again, I surprise even myself. But yeah, let's have a look at them community questions.
So we've got some. We're going to deal with the old patrons first of all. It was less wanting questions from people, although there might be some, but it was more a what's your vibes on the new models, the Leagues of Votann. What was interesting, and this is just going off on a quick tangent, is people were talking about where the naming of the League of Votann comes from. And I think it's a spin on an old Norse name. But I like to believe it's from the word Prince Votann from Flash Gordon, which, as we know, was played by Brian Blessed, who also voices Gotrex in the audiobooks. That, to me, is where I'm believing the name comes from.
Well, fair enough.
Anyway.
I was just trying to think there, because is it not Age of... maybe it's... Because it has a sort of rhythmic to it of like Age of Ultron. Maybe it's a play on the popular Marvel villain.
It could well be.
But obviously, there's not V there. Maybe it's named after the lion robot Voltron.
It could be. I think I've seen people say it's basically it's a spin on Wotan, which is another word for Odin in terms of like the Norse god, which sort of explains, because Vikings, Norse is all very dwarfy, along with the Germanic voice for the squat. So it sort of makes sense.
Do you imagine that one day some squats came into work, and then all of a sudden, when they'd been away sick, they came back and discovered that people had just started saying, "Praise be to Votann," and they were all very kind of perplexed by the whole thing, and no one could really kind of place it. But then over time, they just kind of accepted it as their kind of culturally significant sequence of events, even though it was just essentially some made-up stuff to make the day-to-day monotony of work life a little bit more exciting.
Could well be one of those classic pranks.
Yes. Praise Votann.
Exactly. Anyway, we'll go back to the community questions/comments.
Please. Yes.
So, Mikhail, I think I'm pronouncing that right, says really cool stuff. Hopefully, this will be the team to get my best friend into Kill Team. He sent the news to me for one. I hope for some dwarf Terminator style or very heavy armor or battle suits. Which, as I mentioned before, there are sort of exosuits, so we could see some heavy armor stuff. And so interestingly, when they first did the April Fool's video, I was like, okay, there probably will be squats. I sort of believed that, but I was maybe just a bit conservative because I was like, probably just going to be a kill team. Like, I didn't think it would be a whole 40k faction, but nice to be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, I think that was the general consensus, wasn't it? That, oh, this will be a kill team, and then maybe over time. But yeah, obviously they've come along and said, no, this is a legit 40k force. And obviously it's having all of the bells and whistles associated with it. So yeah, super exciting in that regard. But yeah, I think we would have all been relatively content with the notion that it was going to be a kill team initially, and then built out from there.
I mean,
but, yeah.
part of me would just be happy with a kill team because, like I said, my painting time is precious and it takes me ages to do anything. So having just one squad that I could paint up and be like brilliant, like that would keep me happy actually, and I don't have to worry.
A solid year's work right there.
Well, exactly. It would take me ages.
Yeah.
Next comment is from Dave. He says, when I was young, back in the early 90s, I remember my cousin having a squat army in Epic, and it was awesome. Small, stubby Terminators, cool-looking bikes and trikes, and even airships. I've heard it's going to be a full 40k army release, so I really hope they bring the Mads tech and vehicles with them, maybe even the land train. If GW do this right, it will be an amazing new faction in a game, which I think this hobby needs. Plus, who wouldn't love to see an army of space dwarves racing towards you on bikes, trains, and blimps?
What is it that qualifies a train to be a train? Like, what does a train need to be in order to be a train?
Well, here's the thing. I would say it needs to be on a track. But
see, that was my assertion as well. Right?
But the actual land trains of Epic aren't on tracks. I'm not sure what they're on. I guess like tracked. They're basically big tanks joined together because I think they're on treads. I think that's how they moved around. They're not on wheels.
Is that potentially the defining feature of a train? Is the train actually is the word train defined by the idea of multiple of
like carriages,
of a locomotive engine that carries or drags multiple containers?
But that's also a lorry. Right, because you've got your cab.
But maybe a lorry is a lorry because it's only one thing that it carries. Although sometimes you can have lorries.
I think you can have
sometimes
split lorries. Yeah, so you can have.
So then does that become a train? Hang on, I'm going to Google it. What makes a train? What makes a train?
I imagine it's a locomotive on a track.
Okay, so here we go. This is the Google definition in response to what makes a train a train. Trains are typically defined as one or more locomotives coupled together with or without cars. A collection of rail vehicles may also be called a concit. Anyway, the point is, it's actually seemingly nothing to do with the railway tracks beneath it. It's the actual vehicle itself is because it's multiple locomotives coupled together become a train.
Yeah. So they did a similar thing with the Chaos Dwarves in Fantasy, which was the Forge World contribution, or one of the Forge World contributions to the more recent Chaos Dwarves. And that was... It was a train in terms of they were like joined together, but it was basically lots of multiple carriages, like not quite horse and cart. I think maybe they're being pulled by centaurs or something. I can't remember, but you could buy lots of artillery pieces on wheels, and you could buy multiples and stick them together, so it would form a fantasy land train. So even in fantasy, they had this kind of variation. I think personally what I would like to see is like some kind of hover train, because then it is a bit more train-like then, because it's not on wheels or something. And yeah, if they really want to make it multiple carriages with different artillery pieces, I sort of don't see how that would work in 40k, like just getting around terrain and stuff. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it would definitely be a weird one, right? To have the rules as they are today accommodate a large train. But then the rules as they are today don't really accommodate things like Bane blades and stuff like that either, right? Like,
I mean, the closest thing I can think of is the Tau shield wall, where it's sort of made up of multiple pieces and it can move.
Yeah.
So I guess it would be a bit like that. I think to me, I think the land train, while a cool concept, potentially wouldn't work. I mean, you might see a much
Well,
smaller.
it could be like a mobile terrain feature, like you've just said, though, right? Like that could be something interesting.
Maybe, or it might be really small, so maybe it's just carrying ammo or something. So imagine a Cyclops.
Can't be small, Phil.
It could be
Can't
really
be small.
tiny, and it just
No.
pulling lots of tiny little things.
No, it needs to be massive. It needs to be like humongous. It needs to be a towering monstrosity of a thing. It needs to be like 4 monoliths stuck together.
Maybe. I do think blimps is a cool idea for airships, because obviously,
Yeah,
again,
yeah.
I don't know if it would work on the small scale of 40k, because you kind of want them to be big. But I'd like to see them try. I think gyrocopters seem the more obvious choice for a flyer over the blimp, but a blimp would be cool.
No, I like the idea of a land train Lord of War, and maybe what it does is it moves in exactly the distance that it needs to move in order to put another one of its carriages behind it. So effectively, as it moves forwards, you then bring in behind it the next piece of it, and then that kind of goes along. And then maybe it's a game mechanic, Phil, because you can decide what part of the land train the land train becomes like a core gameplay mechanic, because it's broken up into, say, 5 sections, and they each reveal themselves in each of the turns, and each of the land train segments have different benefits to the army. So it's like different artillery that you can introduce early, or you can introduce other kind of mobility boosting pieces and things that can impact how they operate.
Do you know what? That's a really good idea. like the idea more that it is a fortification piece rather than a vehicle, but it, as you say, parts of it come on each turn, and that gives you benefit, rather than just being like, it's got a rocket on it, so therefore it shoots out of. As you say, maybe it would do, but it would be an artillery barrage. One of them might be a shield pieces. One of them might be a troop transport, so it allow you to have more guys unload for free or whatever.
Yeah.
It could be an idea, but basically it's just a piece that's always going to end up in your deployment zone, so you don't have to worry too much about moving around terrain and stuff.
It's a weird thing, though, isn't it? Because again, that is a beautiful demonstration of the kind of weird, rigid structure of 40k, right? And how now we're in a situation where some of the kind of really fantastical elements of it are really limited by the way that we've collectively decided that the game needs to be played. Because Games Workshop are themselves hindered by this ongoing desire to satisfy a very kind of stringent way of playing. So you can't even begin to conceptualize how those ideas will come to life, because rigidly you need to play the game with, 4 big pieces of terrain here, and here, and then you need this stuff here, and here, and then it becomes like, well, how do you then incorporate these kind of elements into it? And again, I'm not saying that what we've just kind of outlined as a funny little thought exercise is quintessentially what needs to be, but it's a shame, because as I'm saying it, I am approaching it as a relatively absurd statement, because I do know that the game as it is will struggle to facilitate that style of creative expression, because it as much as it's massive, it's also very limited. But also, I suppose as well, there's a cost implication, right? Because ultimately, if you were going to buy a vehicle that's made up of, say, 5 components, and each of them is very uniquely modeled, obviously you have to accommodate for the budgeting of what that is. It's like, to start your squat army, you need to buy a 300-pound train kit, and then from there you build out. It's like,
Yeah, I mean, I
not.
guess you wouldn't have that as like the army mechanic, as in like the army lighting, but as a super heavy or as a fortification that's mobile. I mean, maybe. Like, personally, as I said at the beginning, like stuff like that just doesn't really work on the 40k scale. I mean, it's a cool concept, like as an idea, but trying to make, obviously the land train would have to be scaled to be small enough to be playable. And therefore it's not the huge land train of Epic, but a like more of a normal sized rail train, right?
Well, maybe then it becomes a case of then they add a kind of anti-grav element to it, because again, the game in theory is able to incorporate Imperial Knights, it's able to incorporate monoliths, land raiders, Lords of Skulls. There are lots of big things out there that would replicate that kind of footprint. It's just how you then build mechanically around that, because obviously instinctively you'd want a train to kind of follow a kind of actual kind of train situation, but maybe it just becomes one of those things that they don't need to be directly linked because there is a certain level of coherency, so it becomes like a unit, so it's like a free vehicle unit. But each part of the unit is a different part of the train, as it were, and they need to maintain a 4-inch coherency or a 8-inch coherency or something in order to operate, as it were. So maybe that becomes a way that you can kind of explore it.
Yeah. I mean, you might even end up with like the sort of almost like termite style drills coming up from underground sort of mechanics instead. I mean, there's lots of different ways they could try and take those core elements. Maybe the land train is one where they go, nah, we're just not doing it, and they do something else instead.
I like the idea as well of like having like things like the blimp and that kind of stuff being again another kind of aura thing. So actually not just being a mindless gun platform or something that you need to kind of maneuver around the board in order to get line of sight and shoot things off. I mean, I'm sure you can build that variant into it, but I do like the idea of a kind of almost propaganda blimp that's kind of, running some kind of like messaging or whatever, or even kind of relaying information. So it's essentially, it becomes more like a data point. So it actually has a buffing element to it, as opposed to just a straightforward killing machine. I think that would be quite interesting, because then again, the thing I like about the idea of a blimp is that it theoretically would be a slow moving thing. So unlike all the other flyers that are essentially jet planes that apparently can continue to reside within a very, very tiny portion of the battlefield, this is something that potentially feels more native to that environment, because it is actually moving at around the same pace as a moderately speedy hatchback or whatever. Like it's going like 30 miles an hour, not 700.
Yeah, so the first like use of, I'm not really sure they were blimps, more like hot air balloons in World War One was more like for aerial spotting. So you could end up having something like that, and it just allows you to shoot out of line of sight with some of your weapons, because that's targeting stuff. As you say, it could be an aura buff for morale, or I mean, there's lots of different ways you could do it. But yeah, more, it could even be a small, almost like a small balloon attached to a squad, a bit like a drone, right? So instead of Battelle drones, you've got these kind of floating mini blimps attached to squads helping them out. I mean, there's a lot that they could do, reducing that.
So the vehicles are super interesting for sure. I think that's one of the elements that there could be a lot of creativity to it, because I think that's one of the things that's super interesting, isn't it, about vehicles within 40k, is that they've never really kind of gone to town on them in that sense. They've like, vehicles have kind of been based on the more basic concepts. They're fast moving, lightly armored shock attack vehicles, or they're heavily armored, heavily overladen in terms of like their arsenal of weapons, and they're really, really shooty, or they're flyers or whatever they are, but like they've not kind of conceptually done anything beyond it's a tank, it's a skimmer, it's a plane. They've always kind of been quite limited in terms of how they've expressed what a vehicle can be, even with things like battle suits and that kind of stuff. That's sort of like, it's an adaptation of infantry, and it's still just kind of broadly there to kill things. I think really the only vehicle-esque thing I can think of that predominantly existed in the early instances as a buffing unit was some of the Forge World variants of like certain like tanks and things that they added, but within the main kind of like Citadel range, it was literally the Drakari Kronos is like one of the few things I can kind of think of that was a vehicle that wasn't really there to do anything other than buff. And I suppose maybe the Dark Shroud for Dark Angels, but that kind of concept is few and far between, it feels.
Yes, yeah. And then the other one that Dave mentions is the bikes, and it's like, as I've already said, they're the things I'd like to see least, because Space Marines, Chaos Space Marines do them already. You've got the regular bikes. You've got the quad bike for the Primaris. Gene Stealer cults do bikes and quad bikes. I mean, I don't think there's any trikes in the game. Closest visually is probably a lot of the Drakari and Harlequin flyers, where you've got like a guy on a weapon on the back, bit trike-esque.
You've got the Orc war boss. He's on a trike.
Oh yes, the Orcs. Yeah, they've got some as well. So it's like that's been done to death. I would like to see them on something more futuristic, more high tech.
You know what I'd be into, mate? Because one of the things that these squats look like, they look like the completely IP uninfringing generic space soldier that makes up the front cover of a pack of Golden Wonders Transformer snacks. You're familiar with the Transformer snacks from Golden Wonder?
No.
Are you seriously telling me you've never eaten a spicy flavored Transformer snack?
Oh,
they're like one of
the crisps.
The crisps that you make into cars, because they got a man and then wheels, and then you can make them into a.
I remember Space Invaders.
No.
I'm sure I've seen Transformers, but I don't think I've eaten them.
Well, mate, you're missing out. It's a culinary delight. But the point is, Phil, is that the gimmick of the Transformer snack is obviously that you can make it into a car. So maybe that's what they can have. They can have armor that can
transform,
have wheels on the sides, and then it can be like cars. Which, to be fair, is actually what Daniel from Transformers the movie, the 1980s Transformer movie, did. He transformed into a car because of his robot suit.
Okay, a bit like Power Rangers, basically.
Nothing like Power Rangers.
But Power
Rangers have never transformed into cars.
Well, no, they've taken they each have their own like animal or whatever, and then they transform into a big giant robot.
Oh yeah, the Zords.
Yeah,
the little the robot dinosaurs.
The Power Rangers are in. Yeah.
Well,
not,
they're
not
in.
The
they
actual
turn
Power
into
Rangers
them
themselves.
They never turn into cars, mate. There was Power Rangers Turbo where the Zords were cars.
Yeah, there you go.
But I don't think they ever. I'm going to share my screen with you momentarily, Phil, just so as you can see what Transformer snacks are.
Okay.
Here you go.
Sorry,
that's Transformer snacks. You familiar with that? And look, what does that look like if not a squat?
I guess so, if you squint hard enough.
No. There you go. I'm telling you, mate, that's what it's going to be. They're going to be able to turn into cars.
I mean, that would be quite a concept.
Like Morty from Rick and Morty, he turns into a car, doesn't he?
I don't remember that. Anyway. Moving on. So Mark says, deep rock galactic vibes. Really excited to see how they do the full helms. I'm sure they won't fail to be Ironbreaker-esque goodness. I'm assuming the League is going to be a union of space mining guilds. The real question is how squats will fit into the actual game. The Tau/Admech have stolen the usual dwarven fire superiority space, and Gene Stealer cults have the space miner aesthetic as well now, which is kind of what we talked about. But interesting, the Tau and Admech do a lot of the big firepower stuff. I think with Dwarves of Fantasy always have a lot of machinery, though. I mean, I guess Admech are more in that. So, I mean, even Tau do have machines, but they're like suits as opposed to here's an actual thing next to it, which is why maybe the whole kind of AI robot thing is more akin to a futuristic version of squats.
Potentially. I mean, definitely giving off the Deep Rock Galactic vibe for sure. It's intriguing whether or not Deep Rock Galactic was in no way inspired by the existence of squats, or whether or not they were taking other, dwarf in sci-fi gaming and or, cultural references. But I think it definitely sort of mimics that kind of that look But again, I think that's always how it was going to go, right? I mean, there's only so many ways that you can really do dwarves in space by still having them be space dwarves, right? So it makes sense.
Yeah, and as Mark also said, I'm kind of keen to see what their like helmets will be. And also, I wonder if there's like potential kit bash versions with the Caradron Overlords, like taking their helmets, because their helmets have like the beards inbuilt into them, which I think is quite cool. So it'd be interesting to see how these guys look, or if they have just a bit more like a dome aesthetic.
I'd quite like the dome, to be fair, though. Wouldn't you? Like the sort of astronaut style.
Well, it's something we
dome.
haven't yet seen in 40k. So I've seen lots of people like kit bash them up. So it'd be quite interesting to have.
And if they were like clear plastic as well, like actually kind of like able to kind of paint the thing underneath and have the
one of the Gene Stealer Cult miners has a domed helmet.
Yes, and it's very similar kind of look. Yeah, so there you go. That's what we want. We want the domes.
Yeah,
because I think the thing is, if they do the weird Caradron Overlord beard helmets, it's very, it needs to feel different. Yeah, exactly. It needs to feel different. I think doing the domes would be a cool look.
Next one we've got CSS here. I presume that's their name. I'm excited for this release, and I'm hoping they are more faction agnostic and can ally with Tau, Imperium, and Elder. I think that would be good for the game narratively. Competitively, I care not, honestly. Units beats me. Hopefully a cool spaceship and weird high-tech weapons.
Yeah, I think in terms of what it's going to be in a competitive sense, they need to be a standalone army, because Games Workshop are rolling back the allies mechanics quite consistently in the competitive sense, because as it turns out, if you have a game where people can just chuck in anything from anywhere, it becomes increasingly difficult to balance and to ultimately define how that works. So I think Games Workshop very sensibly are trying to roll back that kind of mechanic in the competitive sense, because it at least does something towards making the game moderately manageable from a kind of competitive viewpoint. But even then, you can still kind of do it. So if there were rules to facilitate, that would make sense. But from a kind of narrative perspective, I can understand why it would be appealing for these guys to be able to go into other factions. Personally, I just sort of feel like for what they are and what they possibly need to be, I think I'd like them to stand on their own. I don't really want these guys to be out there trying to form alliances with these objectively evil races. I'd quite like them just to be positioned as the good guys. It'd be nice to get some good guys for a change. That's where I kind of keep coming back to this one.
Nice. So John says, I think they have potential to be really cool if done right. There was a rumor associated with the Warcom article that perhaps the Men of Iron would be included in the leagues, which is something I've touched on because I've seen that rumor floating around. Basically, in the Warcom article, they say they've got such technology. Basically, the Adeptus and Mechanicus think their technology is heretical because it's so advanced. And I think, correctly or not, people have associated that with Men of Iron because that is heretical technology, because it's AI, which has been outlawed in modern day Imperium. So, yeah, that would be an interesting way of bringing them into the fold and having them as part of squats, and again, giving squats a sort of unique gameplay mechanics and vehicles by having them associated with it. So that would be interesting. If they don't do it, though, it'd be interesting to see what else they do.
Yeah, I think if Men of Iron made their way into it, that would be interesting. But I think it'd be even more interesting if the squats had kind of created something that didn't have that history, but was itself its own kind of squat version of it. So almost like they're not really familiar with that period of human history, and they are themselves doing things that would potentially lead towards that. So there is a greater sort of synopsis, but greater sort of symbiosis. Sorry, that's the word I was looking for, between them and their technology, and actually that there are units of robot squats that are complete AI, that kind of stuff. So not actually Men of Iron, but almost maybe even like the second coming. Like this is an army that's almost even sort of transitioning into Men of Iron, or a modern adaptation of Men of Iron within that kind of current cycle, as it were. So almost like maybe little kind of resonant parts of the Men of Iron have kind of influenced their technological growth, and are essentially leading them to kind of almost evolve into the new Men of Iron, which would be a really interesting kind of way of taking it. So we're experiencing them at a point where they're on the precipice of becoming what was once a scourge to the forces of men, which would be pretty fun. And the Imperium.
Yeah.
Anyway, there you go.
And then
I love talking nonsense. That's what I kind of discovered from doing this podcast. I love trying to fluff things up.
You're like, I'm an ideas man. I'm not a doer. I think it's
that is 100% it, mate. Yeah, absolutely.
Last one on the old Patreon. We've got Chuck. He says, hoping for the rules mechanic where a unit can hurl one of its models at a target, some sort of toss, if you will.
Well, there you go. I mean, everyone loves a good toss.
Lots of toss at
not
war.
much.
Yeah,
absolutely. Reminds me of that scene of where they were debating the legal logistics of dwarf tossing in Wolf of Wall Street. You remember that scene?
Yes, although I think he's actually referencing Lord of the Rings.
Yes, absolutely. I appreciate that is probably more likely where the reference came from. But yeah, I think that would be quite fantastic if they had that built into it. Maybe they could have the same kind of disregard for, squats, much like orcs do towards snotlings. So as they've got like shock attack guns or whatever, but it's just literally it's just a gigantic robot arm that's just flinging them.
Well, that might be their new artillery unit where it just fires squats at people.
Yes. Wasn't that that's what they had on the Warhammer Online CG sequence, isn't it? They had squat catapults. Not squat catapults, sorry, squig catapults. And they were just catapulting squigs into the enemy lines.
And it kept hitting
just
because doesn't one hit a wall?
Yes, yeah, but I think they're all like armed up with explosives in their mouths and stuff, and they just land on the other end and just go like crazy.
Yeah, that's Warhammer Online, the video game, not
from
Warhammer
the
Online.
olden day.
Yes, the Warhammer community. Yeah, that was a good old game back in those days.
Wasn't too bad, yeah, absolutely.
So we can do some from our Instagram as well.
Please.
We've now, congratulations to us, reached over 1,000 followers on Instagram. Yeah, we did it just on the weekend.
Oh wow!
We're now at 1,009.
Thank you, everyone.
1,009. It's very good.
God, we're starting to feel a little bit legitimate, mate.
Getting up.
We probably need to stop. Now's the time to burn it all.
Yes, before Games Workshop comes knocking at our door, offering us free stuff to review.
I get the feeling we're on their naughty list. I don't think they like us.
I'm not surprised.
I mean, I don't know necessarily what we will have specifically done to have ended up on their naughty list, but I just get the vibe that that's probably where we are.
Yeah, I can imagine that. But you're right. I don't think we've outright done anything. Maybe it was that time when you had a go at one of the Games Workshop staff and talks about how red his face was. Maybe that was it.
Oh, what, the soap video?
He
looked great, man. I'm just envious of how he looked, as it were. I don't think I especially had a go about him, did I? I thought he looked pretty sexy.
Okay, if you say so.
I think you're misremembering that. I think you're misquoting me.
Maybe. I mean,
maybe.
Who knows?
What about Soats? What a great guy.
Okay, so we've got 2-Bit Paints. He says, new squats, great. I'll be collecting another new army. Still no rules for my Forge World Siege of Rax Renegades and Heretics army, or my Krieg Gorgon. Makes me a sad panda.
I mean, there's a lot to digest there.
Well, so I think he's touching on an interesting point that I think some people I've seen sort of have a little moan about online. It's like, okay, Guard haven't got their army, Chaos haven't got their codex out yet, and yet Games Workshop have been spending time and effort to make a whole new faction, and people are kind of begrudgingly going, I just want the codex for my current army. It's the same sort of issue that people have with the Warzone books, I guess. It's like, do the codexes first and then do all of this other cool stuff afterwards. And I think this will come after all the current codexes, so this won't be coming before Guard and Chaos Demons and stuff. At least I hope not. I can't imagine it would happen.
See, I entirely disagree, mate. Go nuts as far as I'm concerned. I understand that it is, deeply disappointing when you've got an affinity for one very specific army and you feel like you've been left behind. I don't think that is what's happening here. I think, obviously, Guard, Chaos Space Marines will have their moment in the sun, and that moment in the sun, it can't be too far away. But, I think ultimately Games Workshop do need to do things to keep things fresh, and we do need to see new armies. And I think at the end of the day, yeah, sure, there's always going to be an instance where people are going to be like, oh, come on, lads, where's my new book? It's like, well, it's coming, but we're doing this for now. It's like, unfortunately, you can't keep everyone happy with this stuff. And as much as obviously I can acknowledge and accept that people would be really disappointed if they were waiting for their specific thing to come along, I think broadly I just accept that it's more interesting overall to get new things added in than it is to have them, litigiously, no, that's not the word I'm looking for, but having to sort of meticulously address everything that already exists before. Because technically, you have rules. You have a book that they sell that lets you play the game. It's not very good, I'll give you that, but it's there, whereas this is new and interesting in its own right. But I think Guard are coming pretty soon, but obviously the Gorgon, that's dead on arrival now.
Well, if they were to do a second version of the Forge World book,
which is needed.
Because this thing, and I said it when that book came out, it's like they would be much better off doing individual Forge World supplements for each codex. So you're only buying a small thing quite cheaply, and it is completely in sync with the codex because it's come out at the same time. Instead, what we got is like an index for the Forge World stuff. Then all the actual codexes have been written afterwards without too much forethought for the Forge World stuff. So the Forge World stuff is way underpowered for the most part, with the exception of a couple of units. And it's sort of tried to be written in a way where it references all the codex as much as possible, so you're not doing too many FAQs and updates to it. But ultimately, once all the codexes for the current armies are out, that Forge World book is quite dated and kind of needs a refresh and needs an update to bring the power of all of those units up in line with the codexes. And if that does happen, I would hope that the Gorgon would be brought back, because as far as I'm aware, the only reason why it wasn't included is because it was out of production at the time that it was written, so therefore it moved to Legends, and then it weirdly came back into production after the compendium came out. So in theory, because it's an active model that they sell, it should get rules put back into the game if they do their job right. But who knows how that it will manifest in actuality. Even if that Codex 2.0 does, or Compendium 2.0 does come out, it might not. That's just my speculation. I'm thinking it feels like it should do, and it might be something they might do.
Yeah, you gotta hope so, haven't you? I think a lot of it depends on whatever their plans are around the Krieg in the future, whether or not they are going to expand the range beyond your Kill Team box set to include a new Rough Rider squad, or more specifically Death Rider squad, whether they are going to give you a new Commissar sculpt, a new, Commander sculpt set to sort of flesh out the range, do Grenadiers in plastic, so on and so forth. If that kind of, or Engineers even, sorry. If that sort of stuff's coming around the corner for Krieg, then I guess it makes sense to wait for that to happen before you then address something like the Compendium 2, because as much as I imagine they might introduce other kind of plastic upgrades and things to flesh out the wider availability of Krieg as a range, I very much doubt that they're going to come along with a plastic Gorgon anytime soon, right? So
no, I suspect a lot of that stuff will still sit with Forge World for some time. I mean, it might be Forge World goes all plastic one day, but not for some time. So Cantor Blue says, what we really want is Chaos Squats. Now that works to be something to get excited about. Imagine an army of Chaos Squats with aliens, servants akin to hobgoblins in Warhammer, all kinds of crazy demon contraptions and chaos runes or something similar. Thing is, Squats will probably get 2 wounds before my Iron Warriors. Cry emoji.
I think squats will come after Chaos Space Marines.
They must.
I think Chaos Space Marines. We are already seeing Games Workshop tease the existence of the Chaos Space Marine books. They've already teased the fact that we're getting the 2 wound Chaos Space Marine. I think the timeline on that is very much likely to be June. I would assume Chaos Space Marines will get what they want, and then I think realistically with squats, we're probably talking. I feel like squads, you have to be thinking they're coming around September time, right? They have to be like 6 months out.
Might be even longer. I mean, I would be quite happy for them to be like a year out if they were to do what they did with Sisters, with the bulletins, and they go, here's some concept artwork, here's some...
It's weird though, right? Because I feel like if they were a year away, I feel like they needed to lay out their stall a bit better at the start. I think they needed to be like, we're working on this, and it's a year away, and this is the plan.
Yeah,
because that's what the kind of community.
I don't think it is by the fact they've gone, here's a model outright. Because I think when they did Sisters, they were like, it's a work in progress.
Did you hear that rumor back in the day that Sisters never should have happened, but it was all because of like leaks or something on Warhammer Community?
Yes, I told you that one from someone
you
that
did.
Spoke to me and mentioned it, and apparently, and complete speculation, that basically someone on the Warhammer community mentioned it in an article that Sisters were coming, and they had no intention of making it. And apparently, Warhammer community nearly got completely shut down because of it. But then they've gone on to create the Sisters range kind of because of it. I mean, it sounds wildly fantastical, but that kind of complete incompetence at a corporation is something I can 100% exists because it happens in every company. So it's believable at the same time while being completely far-fetched.
No, I'm on board with that.
And this is probably why we're on Games Workshop ban list. Maybe.
Fair enough.
I mean,
I'd
like to believe that idea.
But yeah, I think in terms of timelines, I think it'll be this year.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it's more Christmas releases, like maybe.
I don't think we're at a point yet where they're showing us Christmas stuff. I think Christmas stuff tends to kind of come around the June time. I think typically everything kind of gets revealed and then released within up to a sort of 6-month window, as it were.
No, fair point.
So yeah, because you got to think, like, when did we first see? I don't know what the latest thing was. I mean, obviously, 9th edition was kind of interesting because obviously it all kind of got revealed and put out in relatively short timelines. But off the back of that, we were seeing like pictures of orcs and things, but then they came pretty quickly as well. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe it is closer to 3 months. Maybe it'll be out by July. But who knows, right? I mean, that's the joy of these things. Who knows? But
yeah, true. So more questions. In fact, you know what? I'll try and find some actual questions because there are a couple in here. Someone else says Pagan Doc. I'm just trying to work out how it's pronounced. I presume it's Pagan Doc. He says, want to see them show off some AI heresy. So obviously someone else thinking the Men of Iron are coming.
I do think that's a really interesting narrative, though, right? The idea that the Men of Iron potentially, you know, like the kind of the rogue AI has infected or led their development. Like, I think, you know, because there's a relative amount of people who would feel comfortable saying that, you know, robotics is potentially like the evolution of humanity, right? Like the idea that we're building these machines that could eventually, through artificial intelligence and just general greater levels of efficiency, could supplant us or just ultimately, you know, overtake us at some point. And conceptually, that is a sort of sci-fi idea that can kind of resonate, and it's something that Games Workshop obviously explored already with the way that they've introduced the Men of Iron. So I like the idea of almost like, oh, they're actually all servants of some big computer that is essentially driving them in this sort of direction and sort of curtailing them to make them become the perfect host for or build the perfect hosts for the Men of Iron, which would be a cool thing potentially.
It could be good. Maybe the squats themselves are the slaves to their robot overlords.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, wouldn't that be an interesting twist? Yeah. But then in terms of the chaos stuff that they were talking about earlier, with the idea of because obviously, chaos, a lot of what they're saying about squats already is that they've got a lot of heretical technology, and they are essentially a kind of rogue agent. And I do like the fact that often with the Imperium, anything that isn't of the agreed parameters is itself heretical, and then by extension considered chaotic. So maybe they don't need to. Maybe this is an interesting way of exploring chaos without just being it's all horns and tentacle arms. It's actually no, these guys are actually a bit more of a.
I like the idea of a League of Votann as more good guys, and but if you were to do then a chaos version of squats, I would totally do that kind of. They're actually under the hoof of some kind of rogue AI, and they're all kind of corrupted because of that. And it's like the chaos squats aren't in charge; they're more slaves to the evil overlord of some kind of chaos AI, if such a thing. Oh, you could totally get that because you get oh, what's those the weird tech nurgles from that Kill Team Rogue Trader game?
Oh, what the oh Lord, I've forgotten their names now. There was
because they were the technical nurgling warp things, weren't they?
Yes, yeah. Anyway, those things. The names completely eluded me, but yeah.
It will come. Anyway, let's move on. Cadian Sergeant Steele, good guard player. He says, from what I've seen in old squat collections, they typically had the same gear as all the other Imperium units, las guns, autocannons, flamers, etc. Was there really much in the old line of models that really set them apart? And then someone else actually says, it's what I said, like how even orcs had bolters and stuff like that back in Rogue Trader era. So sort of no in terms of their general weapons that they used. The exo armored squats had kind of weird lance stuff on their trikes. I'm trying to think in terms of shooting weapons. It was only when you got to the epic scale where they actually had their own unique flavor.
Yeah, they did have a lot of gun emplacements and things, and obviously they had the exo armors.
The thud gun and the mole launcher was very unique for them.
Yes, at the time. But the actual technology of the weapons, as you say, it was mostly las guns, melters, plasma guns, sort of traditional Imperial Guard stuff, and that didn't really change until you got to the epic scale, where then it did deviate a bit more. But even then, the Cyclops vehicle looked very much like the Leviathan and stuff like that. So you had still some similarities and crossovers between the Imperial epic stuff and the squat epic stuff. But it feels like we're getting a complete refresh in that respect now with the new guys. Yeah, I completely assume that none of their weapons will be presently available kind of weapons. I think they'll have a completely unique arsenal that is entirely their own, which is true of more or less everything nowadays within 40k. So that definitely feels like the way to go. So yeah, that's what I expect we'll see with these guys.
Yeah. Bukhara Jones says, are these an automatic buy for both of you or just Phil?
Just Phil.
Yes. And as I've said, I'm slightly waiting. I'm a bit reserved based on I want to see more, because obviously we've only seen one model. But yeah, so far I'm quite happy to almost drop everything to buy them, which is mad and futile. And I might, bring some sense to myself and go, no, I've got enough to work on. I know out of our sort of mates, Garfield from Rapid Fire Wargaming, he's really keen to get them. Richie, the Quizmaster, he's talked about getting them as well. So I think a lot of people have seen them and kind of quite happy to jump all aboard of that hype land train.
Yeah, no, I mean it's great to see the enthusiasm for them, but yeah, from my side of things, I'm very comfortable giving these guys a miss. I don't think at least initially there's enough there that really kind of appeals for me personally. But that's the joy of this hobby, though. You know, it's the joy of the Games Workshop range. There's always something for somebody, and I'm excited for everyone who is excited about this release because obviously it's really great to see people passionate and infused about the hobby. So good for you, but not for me. Not at least not now.
Well, fair enough. We've got a slightly cynical question from
right.
Legionnaire Purdue. He says, is another faction needed? Is this a move by Games Workshop for the nostalgia people amongst us? I fear this is a distraction from the more important issues that you raised last week, the rising costs, difficult gameplay, etc.
I think it's very clear that this is, again, a very convenient time for them to reveal these kind of things, because obviously the hope is that it will start to stoke more kind of enthusiasm for the game, which is definitely needed at the moment. Do we need another faction? Yeah, of course we do. I think I think the game is at its best when there's loads of variety. I think the thing that really needs to happen and what we desperately need to see from the game is actually getting back to a point where there is more kind of army variety. And I think the way that Games Workshop go about achieving that is by potentially simplifying certain aspects of the rules, but also going back to being willing to give armies negative attributes. I think that's always the thing that's really kind of interesting to me at the moment, is that a lot of the time with these armies, we keep getting things that are just really good at everything, or have differing levels of good at everything. Look at the Tau design concept. They have one phase, as everyone says, although I'd argue they at least have two, in so much as they have movement and shooting. But the point is that the way they perform in shooting is so incredibly strong that it makes up for everything else. However, what they've also done is give them a bunch of mechanics that help them should the one phase not be a viable option, i.e., if you actually could get in there, if you can weather the storm, if you can make it into combat with Tau, typically, if you've played that strategically well, then that should be a disadvantage to the Tau player. However, they've created rules where, one, they have very combat efficient Tau, but moreover, they have mechanics to leave and continue operating as if nothing's happened to them, which again is a balancing mechanic that doesn't really create a kind of sense of reward or a sense of fun. It just basically allows the Tau player to continue to be oppressive and continue to do what they want to do. And that's universal, right? Look at Harlequins. The main problem with Harlequins is they're good at everything. Tau, okay, they're not necessarily good at combat, but they're geared in such a way as it doesn't matter. Custodes are good at everything. Conceptually, they need to get back to a point where there is a negative to this stuff.
Well, in theory, the simplest way to do it is to make every army a rock, paper, scissors to another army.
100% agree.
So, Harlequins can't be the top meta army if, let's say, Space Marines, just picking it out of the top of a hat, was a hard counter. Like, if Space Marines can always dominate Harlequins, but Harlequins can always dominate Orcs, for example, and Orcs can always dominate Tyranids in those kind of matchups. Now, in a way, you could say, well, it would just be unfair, but that is a kind of inherent meta balancing mechanic. But ultimately, every army should be fine-tuned to the point where there's a roughly 55% win rate amongst every other single army. That's ultimately the best balance you could ask for. Everyone has a good chance against anyone else. But a simpler way to do it is to make one army always slightly better at another army, just to give them an advantage. But then always have them have a weakness against another army. And unfortunately, what we tend to see nowadays is armies are just really good at, say, dominating every army, but they don't have a weak spot against another army. So they're not, there is
And then
no
the
hard
point of
counter for
difference,
them.
the point of difference then becomes what is the most efficient at overall performance, and that becomes why Harlequins are so strong at the moment, because of everything. Their rules are so strong that they roll into everything really well. But everything rolls in very well. It's just that, unfortunately, in the pecking order, it just comes down to who is the most efficient. And the fact is that Harlequins are that, because of the fact that they are hard to hit and they hit like a truck. And that's the thing with them, right? It's like, they neutralize a lot of the benefits of some armies. But yeah, I think conceptually, I think the thing is that, again, the game needs to be designed around the idea of some decision making. It needs to have some sort of actual hard choices, whereas a lot of the time at the moment, it's consistently built around allowing people to do everything they want to do all of the time, but also army mechanics are also really regurgitated, right? Like, I don't imagine for a second that the squats are necessarily, within the confines of 9th edition, going to feel that drastically different from any other army that you've seen. They'll probably, like I said earlier, feel like Death Guard with a little bit more impactful shooting. And, this is one of the other inherent kind of issues with the way they've laid out these codexes. So many concepts are kind of regurgitated or just overused. It's going to be like, here's the big gun that ignores invuns and does more wounds. Here's the thing that allows you to re-roll everything. Here's the thing, it's just very, it's very overplayed in some regards.
Yeah, so I'll park my answer for that in a second, and then just talk about the factions. Like, having more factions ultimately is good because it gives people more choice. There's more potential armies that you're going to have to play against when you go to events or in your local, meta or friends and stuff. The downside with that, though, is, and I think it's only exacerbated more so in 9th edition, where there's been such a slow release rate for codexes. So it's like, okay, imagine 10th edition comes around, that's another codex that they've now got to do it before all the codexes are done. It's like, I want to see, I still don't feel like we're playing 9th edition properly yet, because not all the codexes have come out. And it's like, I want to have a good year or two of playing 9th edition proper with all the 9th edition codexes. So adding in more armies each time means, okay, there's a slower rollout before you get that parity where every army's at, in theory, the same level because they've all got their 9th edition codex out. So this is another one that's just going to add to that pile. And I'm sure there'll be more, maybe not in 9th edition, but potentially in 10th edition. But what it means is Games Workshop kind of needs to up their game. It means they need to have more writers, more staff to actually cope with the more books that they've got to deal with. So hopefully, and partly this is, just due to world economics, COVID and all that sort of stuff as to why we've had a slow rollout. Hopefully by 10th edition it's less of an issue and it will go back to what it was like in 8th edition, where it felt like all the codexes came out in a very quick period of time, even though that period of time was still like a year. It just feels like 9th edition, it's been a lot slower, and a lot of that might be beyond their control, but also feels like there's a lot of, like, not burn rate per se, but it feels like the writers are overworked probably because they've got loads of deadlines to get these books out, and that might explain why the balancing issues is through the roof for some of these armies, because they've just got so many to get through, right, in what should be a relatively short period of time, but as it's turning out in terms of when we get delivered to them, it's coming up to 2 years, and it will be well after 2 years by the time all the codexes are actually at their 9th edition version. So I can see people saying that's the downside, but ultimately I think it's a good trade-off, and hopefully that will improve over time. So I'm kind of optimistic about that one.
Yeah.
There was another question which I will answer because it's sort of what you've already talked about. So Quicksos was right, said, what role would squats fill? There's so many techie, shooty armies already. I only hope a small release, a short run of miniatures, just a little blip on the way to 10th edition. I mean, that might be the case in terms of it'll be more than a couple of squads. I imagine it'll be probably.
Was that a potential pun that he was making there about a short run of miniatures, or is that just an accidental?
Maybe accidental. Who knows?
Yeah. I think the role, again, going back to it, the role I'd love to see him fulfill is something more unique mechanically that could be interesting. I like the idea of. Sorry, please, Phil. Please.
No, go on. You finish, and then I'll tell you my idea.
Yeah, no. Well, I like the idea of like going back to what we were saying about that. Well, no, yeah, Death Guard kind of conceptually, but I think in terms of that synopsis of that we gave earlier, the sort of symbiosis between the kind of technology and the characters, I think, is there a potential there that you incorporate certain like hive mind style mechanics? Is it more of a Borg style singularity or whatever it is? Is it that hive collective mind? I think that would probably be a little bit too much of a push, but I think factoring in that kind of technological element and having those kind of actual unit synergies would be super interesting. Having things that have been historically made available through stratagems, but actually have them baked into units. So if there is a vehicle, it gives benefits to the units. If the units are there, they give benefits to vehicles. There is this actual kind of, as I said before, that symbiosis of technology and the organic kind of fighters within it that creates a more kind of technical military force. Because I think, again, every army in 40k, even the Tau, in terms of how they're represented on the board, is just blunt force trauma. Everyone is there to hit you real hard, either with guns or with fists or a combination of claws and giant chainswords or whatever. But actually having an army that actually does something a little bit more nuanced would actually be quite interesting. But anyway, I don't know. I don't think Games Workshop have the time or the ability to write that rule set right now, but I think something like that would be quite cool.
Yeah. So my idea, Caradron Overlords in space. Now, let me expand on that. So you see Harlequins and Drakari, right? Transport heavy army, but they're meant to be very light and fragile. Basically, imagine a heavily armored version of that. Think about the Caradron Overlords. They've got their sky ships. They can embark on them, fly around in them, but they're ultimately flying fortresses that they can shoot out of. So imagine squats in like big floating rhinos. They can shoot out of them. They can do all sorts. Maybe they can somehow link together like a land train by having like some kind of synergy if they're within near each other, but they're all sort of floating around. So you've got all these big heavy vehicles moving the squats around, so maybe compensating for their rubbish movement, but then when they disembark from them to like grab the objectives, then they're kind of slightly slower moving because they're squats with little legs. A very armored force, like mobile armored force, is kind of a unique play style for them. It's like you could do it if you did like Rhino Rush spam from Space Marines and stuff, but no one does that. But this is like their complete whole play style would give them something very unique from like standard shooting armies like Tau, Guard, Admech. So to me, more heavily armored version of Harlequins is how I would see them. Lots of transports that they zip around in initially and then disembark once they've got there.
I mean, I like it, man. I mean, it sounds very...
It is just Caradron Overlords in space. That's it.
Yeah, but I like it. I think that's the thing. I think that kind of army design around that kind of synergy between the vehicles and the infantry kind of reminds me, did you ever play or even hear of a game called Drop Zone Commander?
I know of it, yeah.
So Drop Zone Commander was really interesting because it was like an epic scale game, but the majority, if not the entirety of the meaningful combat took place between these drop ships and tanks. But the infantry were purely there for objective purposes. So effectively, you'd have the infantry units and you'd send them into buildings and they would effectively have mechanics to depict the idea that they were fighting floor to floor inside these in buildings, trying to basically secure objectives. But the real bulk of the tactical gameplay came down to the maneuvering of these dropships and tanks and things to kind of move the infantry around, but had a really nice set of mechanics around those kind of synergies. And I think that's the thing. I think that's the sort of stuff you'd really love to see, because it's true, right? Like Guard have tanks, Guard have lots of tanks, but again, it's the blunt force trauma army. The tanks are there to blast you and to hold in the face of that. Again, if you kill even a Lehman Russ commander, it doesn't massively impact what that army is doing. It is still shooting you. It is still holding positions. Whereas this potentially could be more interesting. It could be a little bit more than that, and could utilize some of the ideas of some of the broader kind of movement-based mechanics that 40k has and other things to actually come up with stuff and actually give a keyword to vehicles that facilitates them being able to do things that vehicles might not otherwise be able to do. Maybe it is that they can hold objectives. Maybe they can hold objectives, but they're like OBSEC, but then, they have other kind of mechanics to them that make them interesting. I genuinely think that kind of synergy is between the kind of AI part of it and the squats themselves would be super interesting.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see, won't we? I think we're relatively aligned on what we feel like probably could work for them.
Yeah,
We'll
I
see.
mean, I'm happy to have my mind blown, and they might go in a completely different direction.
Of
That's
course.
cool. Yeah,
They'll go in a much more boring direction, Phil. It'll just be, here's the infantry squad, here's the Terminator squad, here's this squad. It's kind of like orcs with better armor. Done, and less attacks.
It might be, and that still might work.
That's fine.
Still might work.
That's fine. We can't fault it. I need to see big robots like TikTok from Return to Oz, the wind-up.
Well, he was my favourite one, and he is very squat-esque. So you know, maybe they will do something like him.
Absolutely. Any more questions, Phil?
There's a couple over on Facebook, so we go through.
Let's do them.
Some of those. So Martin says, "Meh. I would rather see Games Workshop expand upon their already existing range of Xenos armies. Kroot mercenaries would have been cooler. What's next? Diggers?" Which is the humans from
Gorkamorka.
Yeah.
I'd love to see diggers. I'd love to get a unit of diggers going. That'd be brilliant. That should be a kill team.
Yeah.
Give us diggers.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. I would love to see. And when we went through the Tau Codex, Kroot mercenaries sort of deserves its own codex. Maybe one day.
I would have loved it. I would have loved a Kroot codex at this point instead of Kroot need to break out on their own. It's clear that Kroot now have been literally degraded to the point of complete nothingness within the forces of the Tau.
We talked about it last week about like how to expand upon the lore and the story of without trying to, with impacting the gameplay. And maybe you can do Kroot mercenaries, and they are Kroot that aren't with the Tau. They are separate, and actually some of them have gone rogue and rebelled, and some haven't. So, Kroot Civil War, not Space Marine Civil War. So a way of justifying how you could have a Kroot faction that is a standalone Xenos army in its own right, isn't allied with Tau, but then you still get Kroot within Tau for those people that want it. Or you then actually just strip them out of the Tau Codex and be like, no. You've now got two armies, not one. You've got Tau and you've got Kroot. What a great way to force people to buy more models.
Yeah, no, agreed.
So we got another one from Nick. He says, given the more modernized design, it will be unlikely to see any throwback units in the leagues of Votann. That being said, a fast attack unit of bikers would be the most likely, but I doubt they'll keep the old school biker aesthetic. His wish list is hover cars, flak armor classic style, short style dreadnoughts. So squatty dreadnoughts would be quite cool. I've already made my views known on bikes. But yeah, hover cars, yeah, everything should float for them. I think floating bricks is what I want.
I feel like the hover stuff. I don't know. I feel like I again, I'm okay with it maybe, but like I feel like I wouldn't want it to. I want it to be more like monoliths, I suppose, where it's like very, very kind of
Yes.
close to the ground, slow and purposeful.
Yeah, a bit like
you know?
the grav tanks, but without the
Yeah.
grav plates because their technology is slightly better. But yeah, I don't want it floating up high in the sky. Nice, slow, low to the ground. Seems quite suitable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the last one I'll do is from Adam. He says, I'm stoked to hear about squats making a comeback. Soon it will be time for all these people who wanted them back to put their money where their mouth is. So maybe me? I don't know. I actually didn't think they would come back. So I'm curious what their stick will be and what kind of throwbacks Games Workshop will drop in the range and rules. So yeah, we've kind of already talked about it, like what will be their play style and their mechanics. But yeah, and that sort of ties in with what Nick said about what kind of old school nods and winks they will do. I kind of hope we don't get like braided beards or I mean, in the actual trailer reveal, we got the druidic like it's like a rune symbol of the dwarf like face, like the symbol. It's like that was nice there, but I hope they don't overly do that and put it on all the units in the way that you get it in kind of classic dwarves, where it's like little tokens and talismans, and it's like knotted into their beards and all sorts of weird stuff. I would rather they leave it out of these guys and just take them in a new direction.
Yeah, I agree. I guess we'll see how that continues to develop, but it does seem like they're not gonna go too heavy into the kind of dwarfy side of things. But then maybe that's a unit specific type of thing, like say like the Wolfen for Space Wolves, where you have the kind of Troll Slayer-esque unit, which
You've
is
got
the
drunk squats.
Yes, yeah, or just something that's more, the berserker style,
Troll Slayer-esque,
yeah, something that sort of more kind of hinders back to the kind of, again, a sort of ancestral tradition of sorts where it's much more that, but then even then still done in a way that's maybe more interesting than just having big burly shirtless dwarfs with massive braided beards or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it might just be like names. It might be so you had Heathguard, which I think were like the kind of command units, or at least the elite guard for the command unit. So you might get something like that where either just the concept or a bit of the look, or maybe the name is reused. I think Exo Armor seems like a bit of a no-brainer that they could do quite easily, because they could update that armor look to the new style, but it's still called Exo Armor or something along those lines.
Yeah, totally agree. All right, well, there we go. That's us having talked about squats. I didn't imagine that we would go north of 2 hours, but we did.
Huzzah!
So hopefully that was somewhat entertaining for all of you listening along at home. We're going to transition now to whatever it is that we decide to do next. Who knows what that could be? Transitional noise. It's only the flipping outro. Goodness gracious, Phil. I didn't imagine we were going to talk about squats for that long. We were going to try and get a segment in where we talked about whether we thought leaks were a thing. It feels like that is substantial enough of a talking point that we should probably do an episode on it. So rather than talk about it now, we'll tease that that's something we'll talk about in the future, right?
Exactly. It is an episode in and of itself. I don't think it will be the next episode because the Tyrannid Codex is coming out for pre-order this weekend, I think. So we will no doubt be doing Tyrannids at some point in the next episode. I also think there's at some point the new Vigilus book, part 2, but it's not called part 2. Vigilus, is it Nachman Gauntlet? I think it's called.
My god, you've seen the cover art for that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not as good as the Abaddon one, and I know everyone complained about the Abaddon one, although I quite liked it. So, It's alright. It's
I
not great.
liked the Abaddon artwork. I just didn't like what it became on the cover. It was like that weird thing that they needed to put it within that kind of graphical chaos point
arrow
star
thing.
effect that just.
I quite like that, but as you say, you've missed out on some of the cool elements of the artwork. I think also the artworks is not as high quality in comparison to sort of the Codex artwork, because they've obviously probably just paying their artists more to spend more time on those, so they're a lot more detailed.
I think the thing is, right, is like Harken World Claimer, right, is a character within 40k that seems like he should be cool, who comes across like he should be interesting. And I can't remember what I thought about the mini when it first came into existence. I kind of felt like it was a little bit overblown and a little bit silly. But as is often the case with these things, right, you get more and more used to the miniature as you see it more and you get more kind of comfortable with it. So again, not remembering exactly what my initial response to it is, all I can say is that if over-familiarity typically makes you less kind of negative about a sculpt or a miniature, like say in the case of Centurions, I've become much more comfortable with what a Centurion is in the modern context as time's gone on. I'm less offended by Centurion sculpts than I was initially. Harken is definitely not that mini. He looks terrible still, and the design is so underwhelmingly generic Chaos Space Marine. It's like the most boring Chaos Space Marine character you could ever kind of conceive from a design perspective. It's just basically all the Chaos Space Marine tropes chucked on a model with a weird mask that doesn't really look awesome. And for some reason, in terms of the pose, he's got a lightning claw and a spear. And, he's supposed to be super cool because obviously he's Abaddon's herald. And, I've come here because Abaddon's going to follow me. And da-da-da-da-da. But it's just sort of, I don't know. Nothing about Harken really excites me. So to see him on the cover of a book and already is a negative, but then to essentially have it as some kind of weird sort of spectral artwork where he's kind of almost looks like he's being formed out of a plume of smoke or something, to then limit the actual kind of visibility of that artwork between that kind of arrow creative, just essentially delivers what probably is the most underwhelming cover in all of 40k 9th edition. I mean, and I'm talking about comparisons to some of the other Warzone books where we've seen Skitarii with axes in their heads or, little circles with Gazkol's face on them and all the rest of it. This probably is the worst cover of 9th edition so far.
Ooh, that is quite interesting. See, weirdly, I didn't even clock it was Harken World Claimer. I was called Rift.
Oh, did you not?
No, I just was like, Chaos Space Marine guy. Okay. But
it's Harken.
What's
your vibe with Harken? Am I alone in being a bit like, he's super boring? But is that just me?
No, I think you're right. I think that his problem is he probably is the old school proportions of Space Marine. So I think he'll just older Space Marine.
No, I think he's new proportions. I think he's a big boy.
As you think? No, I just remember him looking a bit odd, but that could just be the pose.
I think though he comes from that weird, and again, I'm really, really cautious about what potentially could be around the corner for Chaos, because I think currently the actual hit rate of great Chaos Space Marine sculpts is pretty hit and miss. Like the standard Chaos Space Marine squad, fantastic. The Havocs, fantastic. The Terminators, fantastic. Abaddon, fantastic. Fabius Bar, fantastic. But then you start looking at some of the other things they've been doing with it, and you start to be a little bit like, it's a bit much, isn't it? And like Harkens of that kind of school where it's like, it's just a bit of a sort of mishmash of things. But that being said, actually, when you go through the Chaos Space Marine range, much as I am right now, actually he stands relatively alone in that problem, besides some of the other stuff that came with like the demon summoners and things like that, because their Dark Apostle's gorgeous, the new Sorcerer's gorgeous, the Chaos Lord kit's amazing. Just Harken World Claimer, he just looks awful. He's not doing it for me, Phil.
No, Fair enough. I remember his spear looking very cool because I used that for my Smash Captain for my Minotaurs. Yeah, I think he's got a weird one because obviously his skull racks aren't very aerodynamic and he's just got a bit of an odd pose. I think the illustration that they provided in the article where they've been talking about it he looks really cool there. Just maybe
it's the best he looks, but still not the best.
I think it's one of those things that Space Marines are very bulky, they're heavily armored, so trying to make them look dynamic and flying through the air is almost quite counterintuitive to how your mind thinks they should look. So I think it's just always going to look a bit odd, I think. But plus, I'm not a huge fan of... Oh, go on.
I can also imagine, I'm just looking at the sculpt again, just to be 100% on my opinions on this thing. But I can imagine he's a nightmare as well, because the entire miniature is held on a pipe. It's like, what a nightmare that's going to be. Like, literally, it's got a pipe protruding out of a Primaris Marine that he's basically stood on. So it's like, it looks like it will consistently be a real pain to keep that guy in one piece.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
But regardless of the miniature itself, the cover isn't really kind of setting my world on fire. But hey, look, I mean, you know, I'm excited to read whatever rules might lie within it. You know, I'll buy it because
I suspect there will be Chaos Knights in there in terms of probably like an Armies of Renown or something, because I finally finished Vigilus Alone, and one of the last things that they actually talk about is that they're going off to the Chaos Knight world that is in the Gauntlet. So that makes me think, especially with Chaos Knights around the corner, that they're going to have something specific for them, whether that's a Codex supplement or an Armies of Renown, I don't know, but it's probably going to be one of them. That's my only speculation.
Most likely an Army of Renown, surely.
I would hope so. But you never know. You might get a Codex supplement talking about, how was it? The House Korvax, which is the newest, or one of the, I think there might be several, but definitely one of the new night houses for Chaos. Because basically trying to think now, Warzone Charadon, you had House Raven, their planet Ravon got spirited.
Yes.
The Ravon got spirited away by Be'lakor. So Be'lakor was summoned, and he managed to steal away the entire planet. The remnants of House Raven basically left planetless and were then sort of going on a crusade to like search for their planet, find out what happened to it. But I presume now what was on that planet has now turned into House Korvax and is now a Chaos Knight world. So maybe we get something to do with them. But obviously, I'm sure we'll see more of them in the actual Chaos Knight book as well. And to me, that was one of I posted about it on my Instagram because I thought it was just one of those interesting bits of lore that actually has a real world impact on the gameplay by the fact they've given us a new night household. And that to me is like moving the story forward, but done in a kind of cool, tangible way. It's like effectively something they teased in the story and then has now happened in terms of not necessarily a model release, but at least rules that we're going to get when that Night Codex comes. So I thought that was quite cool. It's nice to see them having kind of what I would call real world impacts. Not actual real world, but in-game real world impact, like cause and effect and stuff like that. So I thought that was really cool. So that was cool. Yeah, the Vigilus Alone book, though, it was a bit disappointing by the end of it. Not really much happened, I didn't think.
Paralyzed by their inability to make interesting narrative changes to anything, basically.
Well, it just felt like they spent most of it explaining what had happened since Marnus Calgar had not died, but was assumed to had been killed. The fallout of that, lots of talking about faith and the importance of faith, which ties in very heavily with the acts of, and it's not acts of faith mechanic, but there is a faith mechanic in the Crusade book that corresponds to it. which is cool. That's sort of like a key element. The most interesting bit, as always, was the Inquisitor. So Inquisitor, oh god, what's his name? Cartavonus, that's it. I was just looking up there because the model's tucked away. So he's a key character. He's got his squad of like black clad armored inquisitorial agents, I presume, like scions, like troopers, and he basically goes around Vigilus destroying all of the chaos gates. So his story is kind of building up to something, you don't quite know what, and I thought that bit was really cool. Everything else just sort of flew past me, went in one eye and out the other, I guess.
There you go. Well, hopefully this develops the narrative in an interesting way, but in terms of a kind of production quality perspective, it's that thing where it's like
So, well, here's the thing. I've sort of discovered I've made a few realizations about these books, because early doors, when the first one came out, I was like, wow, these are really cool. They're like the Forge World books. They're like just as good. And in hindsight, having them done like 3 of them now, I'm like, well, actually, they're not as good. Because one thing they miss, there's an awful lot of story. The text is very dense. A lot of stuff happens, but it's just kind of filler. Like lots of really small snippets of stories that are like paragraph long, and you go, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. And then they skip over it and they're on to the next thing and the next thing. And there is story, but there is not a lot of it. But the main thing I realized is there's no visuals for the individual stories. There's very little bespoke artwork for the actual stories, whereas now you didn't get much artwork per se in the 40k books, the Forge World books, because the Forge World books mostly did photography that was themed and stylized to look like picked captures, like i.e. photographs, and that's how they portrayed it. But then they also did lots of graphical art style, like kind of technical diagrams of
lots of schematics and color schemes and that sort of stuff. Yeah,
color schemes for like armors and explaining like the different types of armor and stuff. And sometimes I remember in Siege of Vrax, the first one, they had lots of illustrations of the Krieg and the renegades and heretics. Like here's a plague Ogrin, and here's breaking down its weapons and equipment and stuff like that. And you don't really get that in this book. You get a lot of generic 40k artwork that has been used in previous codexes, reused, sort of where appropriate. Oh, talking about Abaddon, here's a picture of Abaddon. You quite often get Space Marine profiles, like here's all the different armors and stuff like that. So you've got Wardens of the Gauntlet, so they're the new, a bit like the Wardens that you had in the Bad Dabble War. So there's a bunch of Space Marine chapters getting together to go, we're going to protect the Vigilus sector and the Gauntlet and stuff. So you've got Wardens of the Gauntlet, and you've got lots of those kind of profile artworks for them. But you see that in all the books because it's super easy to do, right? It's a Space Marine template that you just color in effectively. You get lots of maps, because once you've done one map, you can then repeat that like 4-5 times in the book, and all you do is you change where the arrows and the icons are to show where stuff's moved around. It's all very, let's say, low-hanging fruit, if we're being critical, in terms of, for a designer, once you've done it once, doing the others is super quick. Whereas doing artwork is really probably the most expensive thing that you can put in a book, because it's actually really time consuming to hire an artist to do that, or it's time consuming for them to do it.
Yes, of course.
The only real interesting artwork that you do see is the photography that isn't in the sort of story portion, so it doesn't easily relate to, as you're reading it, you can't easily visualize what's happening. But when it gets to the campaign system, or even some of the pages in between, either the Crusade rules or the Armies of Renown and the Codex supplements, stuff like that, they have done some bespoke miniature photography, and that stuff is interesting, and they've done that specifically for the setting and stuff like that. But I kind of wish that was throughout the lore side of it. I wish the lore wasn't so small, tiny text, because I find it quite difficult to read, and it's just really, really chunky. Like there's a lot to read through just to get through like 1 or 2 pages. I'd almost rather they up the font size, reduce the amount of text, but then just make what they are saying really interesting. So
Yeah.
overall, as much as I loved them when I first started them, having now got through them all, I'm a bit like, I kind of do want them to be a lot better and to have a lot more artwork, unique artwork in them. Sort of make the story less wordy, but also more interesting at the same time. Maybe focus on more snippets of stuff rather than giving you broader. They give you basically 100 mini stories with a rough overarching story, but I'd rather like maybe 5 good stories that tie together, that you can actually really get into and they're interesting. That's sort of how I'd best try and explain it.
No, and I think it's a really good explanation, mate. And again, I think ultimately, this is one of the unfortunate realities of that kind of conflict, when ultimately what you're trying to deliver is something that is there in some regards to kind of drive the incremental revenues and profits, right? Like these books, these supplements aren't necessarily core releases within the Games Workshop kind of 40k portfolio. They're very almost expansion-esque, and as a result, I think there is a certain amount of, discombobulation almost in the way that they're constructed, right? They're very sort of piecemeal and very kind of asset flippy in a way. It's just like, oh, we got all this stuff, we'll get this stuff together, and again, we're not going to really like it. They're not going to put anything that's that significant in those books. They're never going to really do a narrative event that really is very meaningful, because they want to potentially reserve those kind of stories for Black Library, or reserve those stories for major releases like new rule books for new editions, or codexes for significant factions. I think that's really where those narratives take shape within the confines of these supplements. I think they're just sort of it's just sort of more kind of like you say, sort of fluff or filler, I suppose, which
there was 2 other things. One of them is obviously they have within the campaign setting, they've got the, I don't know what they're called, they're basically the Legends missions. So you've got maybe 2 or 3 like classic missions replaying events of the campaign, but rather I'd sort of more like just basically more missions. Like I'd rather not have the Crusade books, even though I think they're fantastic, and just have a lot of those missions, or maybe like 3 or 4 of them taken from the Crusade book, put into the actual Warzone book. So it feels like you've got some substantial, like, oh, let's play something in this setting. Okay, I've got 6 missions to play, plus 1 or 2 legend missions where we're recreating stuff. One thing I really liked about the very old Vigilus books was, dare I say, the formations that were in them, where you could, because what was cool about it is you were going, I get to play an army, I get to play my guard army in a very particular play style. Like, oh, I can do an artillery company, or I can do a tank company, or a scion drop force, like really thematic. And in theory, it's meant to be themed to the setting of Vigilus. And they sort of do that with the Armies of Renowned, not so much with the Codex supplements, because the Codex supplements are just expanding the rules to a specific army subfaction that exists. Yeah, they might be in that setting, but this is also just their generic rules for them wherever they are. It's not setting specific. And weirdly, I've been reading about bolt action lately, and they have so they have, you choose your army, so like, cool, I want to play Germans, but then they have a theatre of war for that army where you go, okay, cool, I'm playing them in Africa, or I'm playing them in France or in Russia. So, and obviously each time you do a different theatre of war, you have different like restrictions on what units you can select, or access to certain gear and equipment and stuff like that. And that's kind of what the old Force Org chart, how it was used in earlier editions of the game. And like, yeah, I sort of want something a bit like that, a bit like formations, sort of like Armies of Renown, but maybe more condensed, and maybe for like 4 or 5 different armies per Warzone book. So you go, okay, here's the Nachman Gauntlet book. We're talking the actual people that fight in this campaign historically, but like Chaos Knights, Chaos Space Marines, actual Space Marines, and let's say Gene Stealer Cult, right? Because they were on Vigilus. And then all of them have a specific formation / theatre of war special rules for playing them in a particular play style that match that setting. And then they might get another theatre of war formation, let's call them for better words, or armies of renown in another book as well. So you might have multiples of these all over the place. And it means, cool, I want to play my army in this particular setting. Great, I can play them in a very unique way. So I think the armies of renown is cool, but they just do 1 per book, and it's like, that's not enough. It's like, give me 5 of them, but just make them a bit smaller, maybe, like streamline them down so it's not like tons of stratagems. It's like how they did it in the old Vigilus book. Like, they were literally 1 pages, right? And the Vigilus book did them for every army. It's like, you don't need to go that overboard, but just give us more. And I think if they've done all of those little things, I think these Warzone books would be a lot better.
See, for me, and you touch on a really interesting point there, I always sort of felt like one of the things that could have been really useful is if, Games Workshop actually built an army building mechanic that was built around certain styles of commander, for example. So, like, I'll use Space Marines as the example because it's the easiest example to kind of give. But it's like, if I take a lieutenant as my HQ, I have access to these units, but I don't have access to these units because a lieutenant wouldn't have these forces garrisoned to his, thing. Admittedly, you would then have mechanics that would mean that you could use, say, one of those units as a kind of special requisition that was specifically kind of done as an exception to the rule. But typically you get one of a selection of things that you wouldn't otherwise access. And I think that would be interesting. It's like librarians can take these kind of forces. Captains can have access to a broader array of forces, but then they need lieutenants to then unlock other elements because there are just command structures in play. And I always thought that there should be a way that you can create a kind of army list creation that is tied to commanders and that kind of infrastructure. Because it just sort of makes sense, right? Like, at the end of the day, if you're bringing a captain, it means that a captain would be able to gain access to some of the more elite elements of the company. But a lieutenant wouldn't probably be able to really justify himself leading, Terminators, leading, other kind of more elite Marines, because they're on a relative kind of even keel, to be one of the Terminators possibly means you maybe were at some point a lieutenant. I mean, I appreciate the kind of command structures within Marines are such that typically that probably isn't the case, but maybe it is in some instances. And I think it was just that thing where it's like, that sort of stuff would have been cool to try and bring in those restrictions to help balance the game in some regards, because I think that's one of the things that's really interesting about 40k at the moment is it's that, again, complete flexibility to do whatever you want all of the time. I think some restriction would be helpful if balanced and created in interesting ways. Again, you're talking about new layers of complexity, I suppose, because ultimately you've got to make decisions about why having a librarian leading your army restricts you in this way and what that does to the overall kind of performance of the army. But it could certainly help you with regards to creating some balance, as it were.
Even if you restricted that to like Warzone books for like a specific narrative, I mean, they could do that. They could just add that in as
that was
a kind of like mission pack, right? Like, you don't need it in your core rules. You can just be like, here's a new mission pack. Here's a new way to play. In addition to the GT mission pack, you can have, I don't know, the command mission pack, and it's all about another way of building your army and playing your games that's slightly different from the normal way of playing 40k.
Well, that was sort of the leak that was doing the rounds, wasn't it? That they were going to restrict what you could access because, they don't have so many of these things in these war zones, therefore you can't. But I was like, yeah, that makes sense, right? Like, why not do that? Why not be like, yeah, you can't take more than one unit of battle suits in a Tau army because in that area or in that campaign they just didn't have that many of them. It's like, cool, that's fine. Like,
yeah, that sort of ties in with my idea of you're playing this army in this specific Warzone campaign, then yes, you do have certain restrictions that are thematic to that narrative.
Yeah.
And it's like, because this isn't tournament play. This is people wanting to play a narrative in a particular setting, probably because they're going to do a campaign. So it's like, give them those specific rules. And I don't think that's a problem. Obviously it doesn't tie in, like it's not so a standard armies of renown. It's like, you can play in a tournament, but maybe these ones aren't tournament specific ones. Maybe they are campaign specific.
I heard
ways of building.
I've heard on the topic of non-tournament style play, I've heard lots of really good things about that new deck that they released last week that neither you nor I was able to remember was a thing and purchase.
So, well, now I'm going to have a slight gripe at you. So this is the Tempest deck, right?
Yes.
So I'd messaged you several times last week saying, should we buy this and play it? And I didn't hear back from you for days and days, to the point where I said, okay, when we finally did decide to meet up, so we all met up last weekend, I was like, well, we'll just buy it on the day then, because it's too late now to order it.
Of course, easy.
So we had a chance where I could have just ordered it if you replied to my messages. Dan.
Mate, you're your own person. You don't need me to give you permission for these things. You can make your own decisions.
I am your humble servant on this show.
As if only that were true.
Well, maybe you're mine now. I get top billing.
Well, exactly. Maybe. Look, here's the thing, mate. You chose not to buy it, as did I, and sadly, we now have to talk in hypotheticals about whether or not it's good. Because the intent was that we wanted to play it, but we weren't able to play it because we weren't able to buy it.
In fact, we were this whole episode would have been all about that deck and how probably good it is.
It seems to be good. I mean, it's sold out really quickly according to the various stores that we tried to purchase it from.
Yep. I spoke to a couple of other people because they saw that I'd mentioned online that I was trying to get hold of it, and they were like, oh, I've actually checked to try and buy it myself or to see if you would want it, and it's all sold out like locally to them as well. So it feels like it's been quite popular. I mean, I can't say I've seen many people since talk about it online, and I do think the overall release of how they promoted it was really poor. Like they did one sort of article about it. Oh, that was it. They didn't really. So they did the preview. When they do the article about this week's previews, they mentioned it there, but didn't really big it up in any way. And then when you go to buy it online and you go, what are these cards? So they talk about it and it sounds like it's open war. It doesn't sound like it's Maelstrom of War. We talked about it last episode and I said it sounds like open war. Apparently it isn't. It is much more like Maelstrom, but Maelstrom using the secondaries that exist kind of in the current game, like raised banners, stuff like that. But it's not worded like that at all. It doesn't read like that when you see it. It says, oh, there's lots of exciting like ways of playing the game and special rules, and then they show you an example card of the special rules that you can play for your missions. Can you guess which one they show you?
I couldn't even begin. Please enlighten me.
It's the one that says there are no special rules in this mission. You're like, so great. I've got no clue as to what this deck is like, because the one card you could have shown us, you've given us a bit of a dud card.
Quality marketing and promotion there for what it is.
I think Beard and Chef from Tabletop Tactics did a much better job at promoting it than anyone else, because they did a whole video about it. They then did a game using it, and I think that is where most people sort of probably heard and saw about it more than the Games Workshop article. Games Workshop then did an article, I think it was like on the day or shortly after it was released, but again, a bit too late, like it's already out on sale at that point. And again, it was like, okay, but it felt like they should be doing way more. Like this should be like their biggest thing, but because it's just a deck of cards, they're like, no, it's here you go, check it out. It's weird. A weird way of
I think
promoting.
it does speak to the general kind of community sentiment, though, that something like this would be very popular, because I think, generally speaking, people are getting pretty tired of the grand tournament process and what it represents for more kind of casual gaming endeavors. And, I think, ultimately, I think we all broadly enjoy tabletop wargaming, but I think this level of administration is becoming a little bit too laborious, on top of all the over familiarity that we need to have. I said it many, many times. I think, it is quite intense, and having a new system that alleviates some of those elements is definitely good. I mean, we here have consistently been an advocate for the open war system. And myself and Phil ended up playing an open war game on Sunday in place of not having the Tempest deck. And we actually did choose to film that. To say we filmed it is a little bit kind of grandiose. We did it in the same style as any of the other bat reps that have existed on our YouTube channel. So if you scroll far enough down, you'll notice
the bottom of the page.
Yeah, we started out the channel with just a few really, really basic bat reps, which is essentially us just kind of chatting through what happened between turns. So we don't really give you any like moment to moment gameplay. It's not live streamed. It's just really basic, kind of bandsy, kind of bite-sized battle reports, as I like to say. And we've hopefully, or are hopefully, going to be delivering one of those to our patrons very soon, as part of our ongoing efforts to actually start saying thank you to patrons and starting to give them something exclusive, even if it's not necessarily the most polished, most fantastic thing. Hopefully it's something that at least sort of sets the tone for what we are going to do going forwards. Myself and Phil actually had some really productive conversations about what we want to do for the patrons. So we've got some other really cool
great ideas.
Content ideas. Oh, great ideas. The best thing ever. Hopefully. So we're going to be over the coming weeks starting to work on those and starting to roll those out. So we won't say what it is, because we worry that if we say it, someone else will start ripping us off before we've had a chance to do it ourselves. But we're going to do some fun stuff that hopefully will start to feel a little bit more meaningful for those that have been generous enough to support us on Patreon, and we do obviously really appreciate those that have done so. But we did a battle, me and Phil, the forces of the Minotaurs versus the Death Guard. My first time running Death Guard. I traded Death Guard with Garfield over from RFW, so I have a Death Guard army, and I ran it for the first time ever against Phil on Sunday. I had no idea what most of the stuff in my army was capable of. And there were a lot of moments around, say, like turn 3, turn 4, where I had revelations about what things were and what they actually could do.
Yeah. This is good.
Yeah, I was a bit like, oh, apparently it's this. I mean, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because in my local kind of gaming scene, I very rarely play pure Death Guard. Most people who run Death Guard in the times of old went, here's Mortarion, a bunch of token sort of a token unit to fill out something, and then here's or typically it's here's Mortarion and a bunch of relic contemptors with twin Volkites or what have you. Like that was the usual kind of thing. Or here's Mortarion and a load of plague burst crawlers. Here's Mortarion and loads of death shrouds.
Quite often it would be back in the day when you could do it, like loads of plague bearers, the tree, plague burst crawlers, and maybe Mortarion if you felt like it. Yeah, it was more always like Death Guard and Nurgle demons.
Yeah. It's fair to say that it's really rare that you see kind of people running the more kind of, I guess, more sort of generic elements of the Death Guard. But so that was the thing. I've not really seen them being used. So like Typhus, Poxwalkers, the Blight drones, the buggies,
the bitey things,
the bitey things.
but I can't remember what they're called. Yeah.
No, me neither. But this is the thing. Like it was a really interesting game for sure. So we've recorded that. I need to edit it, but as I say, me and Phil are going out on Friday night. We're gonna go out to downtown, aren't we, Phil?
Up London.
Yeah, we're gonna go up London town. Me and Phil. We're gonna go out on the razzmatazz, as it were. It's gonna be a lovely time.
Should be very good fun. What I will do is I'll post up some photos of the game on the Lookout Sir Instagram. I've already posted a couple on my one, but I'll do it on the Lookout Sir.
Yeah, that'd be
great.
great.
People with appetite, so they can check out some. Check out the armies. And
we don't want to oversell it though, Phil, because it's not. It almost certainly isn't going to be very good.
Are you saying it's not worth the Patreon money to sign up to watch it?
I mean, I would never say that, but I would certainly not try and use it as a method for bringing in newbies. If
you're already there, it's a nice little addition.
Exactly, it's a statement of intent, as it were. We understand that we need to do more, because at the end of the day, I think that is the reality of it, right? We really appreciate people supporting us, because of course we do. It means a lot to us, but at the same time, we don't want to give the impression that we take that for granted. Nor do we want to kind of give the impression that we're trying to push it too aggressively. And I appreciate us doing this, sort of seems like we are. Eventually, all of this stuff will just end up somewhere else, but we're going to have that sort of window, as it were, for that time. I think this Bat Report stuff will probably remain exclusive on Patreon, only because I don't think it's just such a different proposition. I just don't want to put it out there on regular YouTube, because I don't want to give people the wrong impression of what we're about. You know what I mean? It's like I don't want the YouTube channel to have those bat reps on it, because it makes it seem like that's something we're legitimately trying to do, when in reality it's just a sort of nice to have.
Bit of fun on the side.
Yeah, exactly. Because this is a reality, isn't it? Like, people who do bat reps put so much flipping effort into them, and not that we didn't. It's just that
we did.
No, we didn't. Shut up, Phil. Shut up. You say that because you're not the one editing it.
No, that is true.
Unless you want to edit it, that might actually help, Phil. That might assist with it coming out. I can send you the files.
No, I'm good, thanks.
Oh, okay, fine. Unbelievable.
Yeah,
unbelievable.
I'm top billing now. I don't have to do that sort of thing.
Oh, I see how it is. This is ridiculous. Anyway, there you go. So yeah, so we did that. So that's fun. So hopefully, when we do deliver that to you, you'll enjoy it. And then, yeah, look forward to us coming up with some other funny things that we want to do for our patrons that we may then also make available after the fact, because it does seem fun. I'll give away one of them, actually, because one of them isn't actually that ridiculously silly to want to mimic. Both myself and Phil have played on the Warhammer TV live stream, as it was called. So in the early days of Warhammer TV, when it was a Twitch channel, myself and Phil have both had games broadcasted and commentated by the Warhammer Live team. So we thought it'd be fun to do a watch along video piece where we essentially watch our bat reps and commentate over the top of them. So effectively it will be a more kind of in-depth analysis of our performances, but also of our thought processes and what we were trying to broadly go for at the time. So that we think has been something quite fun. So we've tracked down our videos on Twitch, and we're going to sit down and watch them, kind of like a sort of mystery science theater type thing, but with our own battles. So we're gonna put those together, and then other stuff, right, Phil?
Yes.
You excited to see how you performed on Warhammer Live?
No, because I know the outcome.
You're really selling it.
I'll be interesting to. I've not actually watched it at all, so it would be interesting.
Have you never watched it?
No, I couldn't face it.
You couldn't face it.
No.
You worried that the camera would be shining on that a part of your head that you're worried about.
No.
You're not like Joe with the balding spot that he's concerned about.
I'm currently okay. No.
You're all right. That's it. At least you want to remain that way. You don't want to find out the hard truth.
No, exactly. No.
Exactly. Ignorance is bliss.
Yeah. Yes.
But I think it's going all right for you in that regard, Phil. I think it's all holding on in there.
It's doing okay so far.
I'm noticing I'm going increasingly grey now. That's the thing that's really creeping up on me. It's definitely kicking in, mate.
I did notice when I saw you on the weekends.
Oh, of course. It's becoming a thing, you know. I'm soon to become a silver fox,
Well, exactly. That's the look you got to rock.
mate. It's it's age appropriate, right? It's how it is.
Yeah.
Can't be helped. But you know, it happens to the best of us, mate. Not you just yet. At least not all over. In places.
Oh, sorry. I'm nodding. I'm nodding silently.
Exactly. Well done, Phil. You're forgetting where you are.
Exactly. Yeah.
Are you sleepy, mate? Have you had enough?
We can wrap it up here. Yeah, it's been good.
It's been good, but I want to go to bed now. I've got to be up in 5 hours, mate.
Well, that's impressive.
I know. I've got to go to work tomorrow, so I've got to be up at 6 a.m., right? I've got to be up at 6 a.m. to go to work tomorrow. Then I'll come home, then I'll edit this thing together, upload it, then I'll go to work on Friday, and then I'll come out with you and Richie and others Friday night, and then maybe on Saturday I'll get to sleep.
Perfect.
I'm going to be useless on Friday, mate. It's going to be ridiculous. Or I'm going to be useless all weekend. It's going to be one or the other.
At your age, it's probably that one.
Probably. Or both, I suppose. Oh, well. We're all going to have to deal with this at some point in our lives. So, you know, it is what it is, isn't it? I'll just live in consistent denial. That's how I get through.
Fair enough.
Do you think I should dye my hair, Phil? Do you think that would be a good
That's a bad look.
You think so?
Yeah. Goodbye,
I've
everyone.
Done real well,
Bye.
though. I got some, like, frozen tips or something.
No.
No? Okay. Well, anyway, goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Goodbye, everyone.